The river sang with the din of steel and the roar of men locked in mortal strife. Over the broken surface of the trident's rushing waters, the banners of crown and stag clashed beneath a gray sky. Blood stained the shallows, and dying horses whinnied in despair as they thrashed among corpses. A heavy mist drifted over the field, mingling with the acrid smoke from burning wagons, giving the entire scene a ghostly hue. At the heart of the tumult, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, mounted on a great coal-black destrier, fought with a grim determination that belied the ethereal beauty of his silver-gold hair. His armor, encrusted with rubies at the breastplate, glimmered each time lightning split the sky. The storm had come early that day, a sign, some said, that the gods were watching. If so, they were eager spectators to a turning point in Westeros. Robert Baratheon, the rebel who led an uprising in the name of his murdered betrothed, Lyanna Stark, was intent on finishing what he had started. A massive warhammer in both hands, he swung with brutal strength, each blow powerful enough to shatter a knight's breastbone. He bellowed with rage that had simmered in his guts since the first nights of betrayal and heartbreak. Yet the prince met him blow for blow, the clang of hammer on steel echoing across the waters. The Targaryen host pressed forward around them, the Kingsguard resplendent in white cloaks, forming a wedge that cut through the rebel ranks. Rhaegar seemed almost serene in his focus, as though the battle was an unwanted but necessary final chord in a song no one else could hear. Their duel became the crux of the war. Soldiers all around paused at times, enthralled by the spectacle of two warriors who fought not only for kingship but for love and legacy. Sparks danced in the air. Robert staggered under the swing of the prince's longsword, and for a moment, the watchers thought the usurper's knees would buckle. Instead, Robert let out a roar and brought the hammer around in a vicious arc, missing Rhaegar's head by a hair's breadth and slamming into the side of the black destrier. The animal gave a keening shriek and collapsed, nearly crushing the prince. Rhaegar rolled free, his rubies flashing in the half-light of the storm. Blood spattered his cheek where the stallion's flank had burst beneath the hammer's blow. He rose with a cat's grace, sword still in hand, mindful that victory or defeat hung on a razor's edge. Across from him, Robert panted, chest rising and falling like bellows, thick arms shaking from the weight of the hammer. The storm-lashed wind tossed his black hair into his eyes, and blood trickled from a ragged cut on his forehead. Yet neither man would yield. With a furious scream, Robert charged again. The force of his next blow, directed at Rhaegar's chest, might have crumpled steel and bone together. But the Targaryen prince had trained for years under the finest knights in the realm, from Ser Willem Darry to Arthur Dane himself, and he danced aside with preternatural speed. Robert stumbled. Rhaegar seized the moment. He drove his blade toward Robert's midsection where the thick plate was poorly jointed. Gritting his teeth, Robert attempted to parry, but he was too slow. The longsword bit through mail, blood welling instantly across the hammered plates. The rebel staggered back with a groan. A hush fell across the battlefield, the hush that follows disbelief, for many had whispered that Robert Baratheon was a man blessed by the warrior himself, unstoppable in his fury. Now that unstoppable force found its mortal limit. All around them, men caught their breath. Robert fell to his knees, gasping as his hammer slipped from his fingers. Rhaegar felt a stab of pity, a pang of regret. Everything he had done for Lyanna Stark, everything he had hoped to bring about, a better realm, a prophecy fulfilled, had brought him to this grim pass. He saw in Robert's eyes the reflection of his own doubt. Then, with a trembling hand, Robert tried to reach for the hammer once more, but the prince kicked it away. The crown's soldiers poured forward, capturing the wounded rebel. A thunderclap rumbled overhead, drowning the ragged moans of the dying. Rhaegar stood in the shallows, the water tinged red around his boots, and lifted his sword high in triumph. The watchers held their breath. In that moment, the rebellion was broken at the trident, its spine shattered along with the unstoppable pride of Robert Baratheon. Soldiers rushed in, cheering or lamenting. Some lowered their swords in awe, while others crawled to drag wounded friends from the tumult. The fury of the battle dissipated like a passing storm, leaving only the cold certainty that the Targaryen line was not so easily toppled. The Kingsguard, Ser Barristan Selmy, Ser Jonathan Darry, and Ser Oswell went gathered around their prince, each man as tall and straight as a weirwood. Barristan offered Rhaegar his hand, and the prince, whose composure had begun to crack from the strains of combat, gripped it with both of his. Their eyes locked in silent relief. Soon the Kingsmen were tending to Robert's wound. Though the crown held the day, though Rhaegar had triumphed, a deep heaviness overshadowed his heart. He had never wished for the blood of thousands, nor did he delight in the downfall of noble men. As he walked among the fallen, he wanted to kneel, to weep, to pray that the realm might heal from this madness. But he was a prince of the Iron Throne, and princes could not weep where every eye was upon them. The wind tugged his cloak. Above the clamor of dying men and the hush of crows circling overhead, Rhaegar bowed his head in silent reflection. The war, in large part, was done. The consequences had only begun. When the victorious host set about securing the battlefield, Rhaegar saw that the rebel lords had scattered. Some had perished in the waters, crushed beneath horses or drowned in the swirling current. Others had fled, but where could they run now that their figurehead lay gravely wounded? A few were captured alive, kneeling in the blood-sodden mud. The Targaryen banners flapped overhead. A drizzle began to fall, washing away little streams of red into the swift current. Rhaegar found it oddly fitting that the trident's name came from the shape of the forks, for the realm now stood at another fork in the road. Everything would change. In the center of the battered camp, the king's men erected a large pavilion where Robert Baratheon was placed on a litter. Physicians hurried to attend him, praying they might save his life. Rhaegar lingered outside, wrestling with a sense of duty and guilt. A slender figure in the gleaming white of the king's guard, Barristan Selmy, approached and murmured, "You have done what you must, your grace." Rhaegar cast a glance at the older knight, seeing the lines of weariness etched into his face. "I only hope it was not more than we can bear," the prince replied softly. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the promise he had made, to build a better world after ridding the realm of the madness that gripped his father and now threatened everything he loved. The rubies on his breastplate felt heavier than plate steel. That night, the victors huddled around fires that burned low in the drizzling rain. Word was sent to King's Landing of the triumph, though Rhaegar knew that his father, King Aerys II Targaryen, would receive the news with a mingling of joy and paranoia. The Mad King might see a cause for celebration, or he might question why it had taken Rhaegar so long, or why half the realm had dared to defy him in the first place. Indeed, the king's mind was as unpredictable as wildfire. In the flickering light of the encampment, Rhaegar could almost see reflections of that toxic green flame dancing in the shadows. He retired to a quiet corner of the tent, kneeling on a coarse rug. Rain pattered on the canvas overhead. The hush of the night weighed heavily, broken only by the muffled moans of wounded men. He ran a hand through his silver-blonde hair and allowed himself a moment to remember Lyanna Stark. It was for her he had risked the realm, for a prophecy that rang in his ears as a half-remembered dream. Yet how would things settle now that so many had died? Could the realm reconcile under the Targaryen banner, or would the seeds of discontent grow anew? He thought of his own family, his wife, Elia Martell, and his children, Rhaenys and Aegon. He remembered the day Aegon was born and how he had whispered to Ser Arthur Dayne that the boy might be the prince that was promised. He thought of the Tower of Joy, a secret sanctuary where he had placed Lyanna with Arthur Dayne and Oswell went to protect her from the wrath of those who would hate her or from his father's fury. He had believed he was following destiny, forging alliances that would save the Seven Kingdoms. Now, with Robert at his mercy and the rebellion shattered, he wondered if destiny had devoured them all. At dawn, the horns sounded across the campsite. Gray daybreak revealed the battered remains of the rebel host, few in number, silent in defeat. Rhaegar emerged from his tent wearing a simple tunic beneath a cloak embroidered with the three-headed dragon. His eyes flickered across the captured men who awaited judgment. Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, had arrived in the night, battered by the storm. Grim-faced, he stood among a small cluster of men loyal to House Baratheon, men who had not fled in shame or fear. Their battered armor told stories of close escapes. Stannis regarded the prince with an expression carved of stone, though a flicker of hatred showed in his eyes. They had lost, but pride would not allow him to kneel easily. Eddard Stark was not among the men on the field. Rumor said he led his forces north to rescue his sister from what he perceived as an abduction. Perhaps he was still unaware that the battlefield was decided, or perhaps he could not bring himself to bend the knee while Lyanna's honor was in question. Rhaegar yearned to speak with him to end the bloodshed and explain, but the chaos of war had intervened and their paths had not crossed. Yet, gathering his loyal lords and knights, men like Jon Connington, Prince Lewin Martell of the King's Guard, and the stalwart Barristan, Rhaegar led them all into a hastily called war council. He gazed out at the circle of faces, reading triumph, worry, and exhaustion in the lines around their eyes. Their victory was undeniable, but the kingdom stood on the edge of a knife. The defeat of Robert Baratheon would not alone pacify every corner of Westeros. Tywin Lannister, perched at Casterly Rock, had stayed his hand for much of the war, waiting to see which way the scales tipped. The Reach had been fractious, with houses Tyrell, Tarly, and others partially loyal to the throne but uneasy about the king's rumored madness. In Dorne, there still burned a fierce pride for Elia Martell, who had been slighted by the royal family's entanglements. And in the north, a Stark host might yet bristle at the memory of Brandon and Rhaegar Stark's horrific deaths at the hands of Aerys. In the center of the council, Rhaegar stood tall, though lines of fatigue tugged at the corners of his eyes. He cleared his throat, drawing every gaze upon him. "Lords of the realm, we have won a great victory," he began, voice carrying the grave dignity of command. "Yet I will not call it a victory if the realm we inherit is in shambles." He paused, looking from one face to the next. "I ask each of you to consider how we might end this war, truly end it, and begin anew." The words hung in the tense air. A young knight of the Stormlands shifted uneasily. Prince Lewin Martell gave a curt nod, his purple eyes flickering with cautious approval. Sir Jon Connington glanced at Rhaegar with unwavering loyalty. Barristan Selmy's expression was pensive but resolute. He trusted Rhaegar's judgment if not the king's. "We have Robert Baratheon," announced Jon Connington, "wounded but alive. Word will spread quickly that the rebellion is broken. Few will still fight when they learn the fate of its champion." Rhaegar nodded, though his mind churned with the question of how to deal with Robert. The king, his father, would likely order a swift execution. That would be the simplest path to secure the throne. But Rhaegar was haunted by the knowledge that such an act might deepen the hatred that had sparked the rebellion in the first place. Looking around, he saw a swirl of conflicting emotions in the men around him. Some would relish Robert's death, some would fear the consequences of letting him live. Barristan broke the silence. "What if we spared Lord Robert's life?" His gaze flicked to Rhaegar. He is a fearsome warrior, but his claim was pinned on the notion that the realm was ruled by a tyrant. If he sees that justice and peace can prevail, perhaps we can begin to mend. Jon Connington looked skeptical. His entire cause was built on a grievance, the disappearance of Lyanna Stark, the murder of Lord Rhaegar and Brandon. Will leniency truly stay the anger in his heart? He glanced at Rhaegar as though to remind the prince that he himself had once exiled Connington for failing to capture Robert in an earlier campaign. Rhaegar's posture stiffened. Lord Robert is not the only one with anger in his heart. The realm is filled with it from Dorne to the north, from those who have lost loved ones. We must decide if we plan to stoke that anger or douse it. He turned his gaze upon them all, seeing in each face the reflection of a war-weary soul. Lewin Martell spoke next, voice measured. "We must also consider the king in King's Landing. His justice is not often tempered by mercy. If we return with Robert alive, Aerys will expect a spectacle, perhaps another trial by fire, or some new cruelty. Will you deny him that?" Rhaegar exhaled slowly, remembering all the times he had tried to reason with his father. "The king's madness is known to us. But we must be careful. Much blood has been shed to preserve the Targaryen line. If we openly defy our father, that too is treason in the eyes of many." His mind flickered to thoughts of the precious few individuals who knew what Rhaegar truly intended, that he meant to supplant the madness on the throne with a kinder rule, that he believed his father's day was done. But how to accomplish that without plunging the realm into further chaos? The council ended with no easy answers. The immediate plan was to march south, carrying Robert in captivity, and send a clear message to the rebels that further resistance would be futile. Already, ravens took flight from the makeshift rookery, announcing that the Targaryen heir had prevailed. With each passing hour, Rhaegar hoped the realm might edge one step closer to peace. It took them many days to return south from the Ruby Ford, trudging along muddy roads under leaden skies. The men, exhausted from battle and the aftermath, walked in somber lines behind the dragon banner. Along the way, villages greeted them timidly. Word of the defeat had traveled faster than the prince's army, and small folk lined the roads, uncertain whether to hail the returning host or cower in fear. Rhaegar did not march at the head of the column like a conquering hero. Instead, he rode quietly in the midst of the king's guard, head bowed. He was not blind to the hungry children peering from half-collapsed huts. He was not deaf to the whispered rumors of the king's cruelty. Sometimes he would pause and speak a kindly word to a terrified villager, or hand coins from the royal treasury to a farmer whose fields were trampled. But he knew such gestures were small bandages over a gaping wound. Robert Baratheon lay in a cart, feverish and weak, moaning occasionally in delirium. He was tended by a handful of loyal Stormland men who had sworn on their honor not to attempt to break out. Rhaegar had extended them that courtesy in the hope that Robert's life might be preserved. In quiet moments, Rhaegar would step into the tent where Robert lay to gauge how close to death the warrior might be. On the road, whenever they made camp, Rhaegar would stand outside that tent and wonder what might have been if only they had found another path. At last they came within sight of King's Landing, the sprawling capital with its red walls and 7 gates, the city that had once been the pride of House Targaryen. Even from a distance, Rhaegar felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered his father's unpredictability, the wildfire stashes rumored to be hidden beneath the streets, the fear that was woven into the very tapestry of power. The city's gates loomed larger as the host advanced, footsore and battered. On the ramparts, gold-cloaked guards peered down, seeing the dragon banners fluttering in the breeze. Horns sounded in a ragged fanfare, neither celebratory nor entirely neutral. They entered the city in measured procession. The small folk crowded the streets, some cheering the crown's victory, others cursing beneath their breath or simply wearing expressions of hollow-eyed resignation. The stench of King's Landing, of sewage and rotting fish and too many bodies crammed between narrow walls, clung to them. It was a far cry from the heady air of Dorne or the crisp breezes of Dragonstone. Yet for all its filth, King's Landing was home to the Red Keep, the seat of power in the 7 kingdoms. And high atop Aegon's high hill rose the fortress of House Targaryen, a looming presence of red stone and spiked towers that overshadowed the city like a silent threat. Trumpets heralded the arrival of Prince Rhaegar as they passed through the city gate. The crowd parted for the column of knights and footmen. Rhaegar's cloak was spattered with mud, his once ruby-studded armor battered, though the precious stones that remained still caught the sunlight. Barristan Selmy rode at his side, as if ready to shield the prince from any harm. Whispers fluttered through the crowd. "Long live the Prince of Dragonstone," some shouted. Others spat, "Mad kings get," under their breath. But few dared to make a commotion, especially not when the crown's men had the rebellious Robert Baratheon in their custody. Up the narrow streets they rode, until they reached the broad approach to the Red Keep. The gates opened, and within the courtyard, lines of gold cloaks waited. Rhaegar dismounted, ignoring the protest in his stiff muscles, and gestured for Robert's cart to be brought forward. The heavy iron portcullis rose, and the battered remains of the Targaryen loyalist host entered the royal castle. Servants and soldiers alike gawked at the battered figure of the once fearsome rebel. King Aerys II Targaryen awaited them in the throne room, if rumor were to be believed. Rhaegar felt a chill trace up his spine as he approached the massive oak doors leading to the hall of the Iron Throne. He could almost see the flicker of wildfire in his mind's eye, a memory of how his father had burned men alive in this very courtyard. The knights around him shared wary looks, for the king's mood was unpredictable on even the quietest of days. And this day was anything but quiet. The throne room doors swung open. Rhaegar led the way across the cavernous hall, past rows of grim-faced courtiers, past the stench of old incense and rancid sweat. On the Iron Throne itself sat King Aerys. His hair, once a proud silver mane, was thin and unkempt, falling about his shoulders like the hair of a corpse. His beard was tangled, and his fingernails were long and dirty, hooking over the arms of the great seat of swords. In the flickering torchlight, his eyes gleamed with an unsettling mania. Rhaegar's stomach twisted. Once, he remembered, his father had been eloquent, even handsome, but that was long ago, before the sickness of paranoia consumed him. "Here he is, father," said Rhaegar, keeping his tone steady. He bowed stiffly, then stepped aside to let the gold cloaks present the battered Robert Baratheon. A hush fell across the hall. Even the lords and ladies who had remained loyal to the king found themselves holding their breath. Aerys looked down, an eager smile twisting his lips. "At last, the traitor," he hissed, words echoing on the stone walls. "Bring him closer. I would see the man who dared rebel against the true and rightful king." Robert was half dragged, half supported by 2 guards. His face was gaunt with fever, but his blue eyes glimmered with a fury that no wound could quench. Yet he could scarcely remain on his feet. The king stared at him with unbridled glee, tapping his fingertips on the throne's metal arm. "He will burn," Aerys proclaimed, voice quivering with excitement. "All of them shall burn." Rhaegar stepped forward, pulse hammering. "Father, there has been enough bloodshed," he said carefully, projecting calm. "The realm needs stability, not more terror. We have captured Robert Baratheon alive. Let us show mercy. Let us prove ourselves just rulers." Aerys snapped his gaze to his son with such speed that Rhaegar feared the king would leap from the throne and attack him like a cornered animal. The courtiers watched in stunned silence as father and son locked eyes, one set brimming with madness, the other heavy with sorrow and resolve. "Mercy," Aerys spat, flecks of spittle glistening on his lip. "You speak of mercy for the man who turned the realm against us? The man who marched to see us dethroned, who defied the blood of the dragon?" In that fraught moment, Rhaegar felt the tension coil in the air. He could sense the watchers, Varys in the shadows, Pycelle in his fussy robes, Queen Rhaella half-hidden near a column, lords and ladies, knights and stewards. Many trembled, uncertain whether the king would turn on his own heir. Rhaegar would not back down. "The war will end if we show the realm we are not tyrants. The rebellion has cost thousands of lives, drained the coffers, shattered alliances. Killing Robert will not silence the discontent. It may only deepen it." Aerys let out a shrill laugh, standing up so abruptly that the swords of the throne scraped across his back. He winced, but the pain seemed to feed his hysteria. "You speak to me of cost, boy? I am the king. I will not be dictated to by my insolent son." His gaze flitted around wildly. "Where is Tywin Lannister? Has the lion come to see the dragon's victory? Or has he slunk back to his golden cage at the rock to wait out the storm?" Rhaegar kept his voice measured. "Lord Tywin remains at Casterly Rock to await final word of our victory. He has offered no open defiance. Perhaps he believed the realm would be best served if the war were resolved swiftly." The king sneered, then turned back to the guards who held Robert. "Take him to the dungeons. Let him rot for now until I decide how best to set him aflame. Then we shall send bits of him to the rebel lords as a warning. And you," he pointed a long finger at Rhaegar, nails curved like claws. "You will not gainsay me in this. Do you hear, boy?" Rhaegar clenched his fists beneath the folds of his cloak. "Yes, father," he said, his voice hollow. For now he would yield or else risk Aerys unleashing unspeakable horrors on more than just Robert. But in that moment, something inside Rhaegar hardened like steel. The realm could not endure such madness. The time was fast approaching when the question of overthrowing his father would shift from a painful option to an absolute necessity. The king sat back down, cackling to himself about the traitors who would burn. Guards dragged Robert away. The courtiers swiftly found reasons to disperse. By day's end, the hall lay empty except for a handful of silent gold cloaks. Rhaegar stood in a high gallery, gazing down at the Iron Throne, haunted by the knowledge of what must be done. Far below, the flickering torchlight made the swords of the throne shimmer like the scales of a monstrous beast. He recalled the stories of Aegon the Conqueror forging the Iron Throne from the swords of his enemies, and he wondered if the Targaryen dream had always carried the seed of tyranny. Sleep did not come easily that night. In his private chambers, Rhaegar paced. Elia Martell had arrived from Dragonstone that very morning with their children, Rhaenys and Aegon. She had rushed to greet him with tears of relief, though she grew apprehensive at the tension she saw in his eyes. After making sure she and the children were safe, Rhaegar now wrestled with uneasy thoughts. He could almost hear the realm groaning under the weight of the Mad King's cruelty. The rebellion had been crushed, but new storms brewed. A discreet knock sounded on his door. Ser Barristan Selmy stepped inside, bowing low. "My prince," he said quietly, "forgive the intrusion, but I feared you would want news from the dungeons." Rhaegar turned, forcing himself to remain calm. "Speak," he said. He had known Barristan for years, an honorable knight, loyal to House Targaryen, yet no friend to the king's cruelty. The knight's expression was grim. "Robert Baratheon still lives, but the king's jailers have orders to begin torments. I have done what I can to delay them, but King Aerys is mad with vengeance." A hot surge of anger flooded Rhaegar. He knew what vile methods the dungeons of the Red Keep could employ. "This must not continue," he murmured. He clenched his fists. "I will not stand by and watch men be flayed and burned in my father's name." Barristan lowered his head. "Then, my prince, we must consider the consequences of defying him openly." Those words hung in the air. Rhaegar nodded curtly and placed a hand on Barristan's shoulder. "I do not desire more bloodshed, but I swore I would rebuild this realm, not watch it drown in madness." He turned to stare at the window at the faint glimmers of torchlight across the Blackwater rush beyond the city walls. "Send word to Sir John Connington, to Prince Lewin, to those we trust. We must act before the king enacts some horror that brings the lords once more to rebellion." Barristan nodded, understanding that they were treading treasonous ground. "There is rumor, my prince, that Eddard Stark is marching south with a small force. They believe Lyanna Stark remains in your custody. If he marches on King's Landing, the king may decide to burn them all." The older knight's voice quivered slightly. He remembered the times Aerys had used wildfire to kill, times that still haunted his dreams. Rhaegar's heart clenched at the mention of Lyanna. The Tower of Joy was a secret known to few. He had tried to keep her safe, far from the vengeful eyes of both sides. But rumor had a way of spreading. If Ned Stark truly marched south, the king's insane reaction could plunge the realm into a second wave of violence. And if Rhaegar did nothing, what future would remain for them all? He dismissed Barristan and took a moment to gather his thoughts. The path was clear, if perilous. Either he stood by and allowed the king to continue, or he took action to remove him from the throne. Only one option offered hope for the realm. The next day, while the king was closeted with his pyromancers and his toadies, Rhaegar met with certain trusted allies in a hidden corner of Maegor's holdfast. The men in attendance were few but notable: Barristan Selmy, Prince Lewin Martell, Sir John Connington, and several knights of the King's Guard who had grown disillusioned with the king's cruelty. Each man knew the risk. Betraying the king was the highest treason. But they also knew the horrors the king had brought upon the Seven Kingdoms, burning Rhaegar Stark alive, ordering the deaths of innocents, condoning the savage acts that had sparked the entire rebellion. If they did not act now, more innocents would die. Solemn oaths were exchanged in whispers. Rhaegar's plan was both simple and dangerous: to force the king's abdication in favor of the crown prince, who would declare amnesty for most of the rebels, thus bringing a swift end to hostilities. Robert Baratheon might be kept alive as a sign of mercy, given that his cause was ended. If Aerys refused to abdicate, Rhaegar would have no choice but to seize him by force. Lewin Martell's jaw tightened as he pledged his sword to Rhaegar's cause, torn between loyalty to House Targaryen and revulsion at the king's madness. John Connington bowed, his eyes shining with renewed devotion to Rhaegar, seeing a chance to restore his own honor. Barristan said little, but his presence was pledge enough. They acted swiftly. Under the guise of receiving final war reports, Rhaegar and a handful of trusted King's Guard confronted the king in his solar. The king stood by a wide table strewn with parchments, and in the corner a brazier glowed with the sickly green light of wildfire contained in glass jars. Pyromancers hovered anxiously, no doubt having prepared more of the vile substance at the king's command. When the prince entered, the king looked up with a scowl. "What is this?" he demanded. "Where's my hand? Where's Carlton Chelstead?" He glared at the men trailing after his son. Rhaegar stepped forward, ignoring the frantic gestures of the pyromancers. "Father," he said calmly, "this ends today. You must step down. In the name of the realm and in the name of our house, I beg you to yield the throne." Silence. Then Aerys barked a laugh that spiraled into a shriek. "Treason? You dare speak to me of stepping down? I am the king. I will see you all burn." He flung out a hand, gesturing for the pyromancers to act. But Barristan and Connington were faster, seizing the terrified men before they could smash the jars of wildfire. A tumult erupted as the men struggled. Lewin Martell swiftly kicked the brazier away from the king, sending glowing embers across the stone floor, where they fizzled harmlessly. Aerys wheeled around, nearly tripping over his robes, eyes wild with betrayal. "You traitorous wretches! I should have strangled you in the cradle, boy." He lunged toward Rhaegar, nails extended like claws. Rhaegar swallowed hard and sidestepped, catching his father's wrist gently but firmly. "Stop," he pleaded, voice cracking with emotion. "I do not wish to harm you, father. I only wish to save the realm." Aerys bared his teeth. "Burn them all," he screamed, thrashing to free himself. "Burn them all." His voice broke in a keening wail. In that instant, Rhaegar saw the father he once loved, now a shadow of a man devoured by madness. Tears stung his eyes. But he could not falter. Gently but with iron resolve, he forced the king's arm behind his back, pressing him face first against the table so he could not reach for any hidden daggers. Connington and Barristan subdued the pyromancers. One jar of wildfire fell to the floor and shattered in a sizzling pool, sending up noxious fumes, but fortunately it did not ignite. The stench choked the air. Aerys howled curses, calling down the wrath of the gods, calling Rhaegar a monster, a usurper. But at last, pinned under the weight of 4 men, the king was disarmed. Rhaegar stood back, trembling, as Barristan declared in a firm voice that King Aerys II Targaryen was under arrest on the orders of the Crown Prince and the King's Guard. Panic flickered through the men present, for they had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. Yet in that moment, Rhaegar felt a strange calm, the sense that perhaps a new day was dawning. They moved quickly. Aerys was taken to his chambers, placed under guard, while a hush fell upon the Red Keep. Soldiers loyal to the prince enforced a curfew within the castle. The king's supporters were either too shocked or too few to mount a counter-revolt, for many had grown fearful of Aerys's increasing mania. Rhaegar called a council at once, summoning the greatest lords present in King's Landing. Varys the spider slithered out of the shadows, his hands folded, a smile of faint curiosity on his lips. Grand Maester Pycelle arrived in a flurry of robes, blinking owlishly. Queen Rhaegar appeared as well, face drawn with sorrow for what had become of her husband. Elia Martell stood behind Rhaegar, resolute, her dark eyes sharp. In the throne room, beneath the looming presence of the Iron Throne, Rhaegar addressed them all. His voice echoed across the stone hall. "Lords and ladies, knights and smallfolk of the realm, I have taken a grievous step, but one I deemed necessary for the welfare of the Seven Kingdoms. King Aerys, my father, is unfit to rule by reason of madness that has claimed his mind and endangered his subjects. In the name of House Targaryen, in the name of peace and justice, I proclaim myself Rhaegar of the House Targaryen, the second of my name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the realm." Gasps rose from the assembled lords, though none spoke in open defiance. Some looked relieved, others uncertain. Varys bowed deeply. Pycelle gripped his chain of office with shaking hands, reading the writing on the wall. Queen Rhaegar lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She said nothing, for she too had lived in terror of her husband for years. Elia placed a hand on Rhaegar's arm, silent support in that fraught moment. Rhaegar lifted his voice again. "I do not claim this throne as a conqueror. I claim it out of necessity. The realm has suffered from war, from the cruelty inflicted by my father, and from the vengeance that rose against him. I vow a new beginning. The crown shall seek reconciliation with the rebels, and all who lay down their arms shall find clemency. Lord Robert Baratheon will be spared. Lord Eddard Stark shall be invited to treat for peace. And the horrors of the past shall not be repeated." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But let all know that the Iron Throne shall not tolerate further rebellion. I will rule with justice and mercy, yet I will rule." In the hush that followed, a scattering of applause broke out, uncertain yet hopeful. Varys smiled enigmatically, dipping his head. Pycelle muttered something that sounded like approval. After a moment, Prince Lewin Martell stepped forward, kneeling in homage. Barristan and Selmy followed suit, and then more knights and lords dropped to one knee, acclaiming the new king. High above, sunlight streamed through the narrow windows, illuminating the hall as though the seven themselves gave their blessing. Thus did Rhaegar Targaryen ascend to the Iron Throne, not by inheritance at his father's death, but by a coup of mercy. The immediate days were a whirlwind of proclamations. By the new king's decree, Robert Baratheon was removed from the dungeons and placed in the care of Grand Maester Pycelle to recover from his wounds. Rhaegar faced the boisterous Storm Lord in private, flanked by Barristan. Robert glared at them, pale and thin, but unbowed in spirit. "You've kept me alive this long," he growled. "What's changed?" Rhaegar did not bristle at the hostility. "I have claimed the throne. My father is removed from power. The war is over, Robert. I offer you peace, leniency, and the chance to live, if you will swear fealty to the crown and lay aside your vengeance." Robert stared at him, disbelieving. "You think a few honeyed words will wash away the memory of Lyanna? Of the father and brother of Eddard Stark, burned alive by your mad sire? Of everything we fought for?" Rhaegar felt a pang in his chest. "No, I do not expect it will wash away anything, but I will not continue the cycle of violence. If you refuse, if you remain my enemy, I cannot allow you to threaten the stability of the realm." His words carried a quiet finality. For a moment, Robert's eyes flickered with raw hatred. But he was trapped, wounded, with no armies left to him. "Swear fealty or die in a dungeon," he muttered, half to himself. "There's no justice in that. Lyanna is still gone." A hush fell. Rhaegar inhaled slowly, uncertain how much Robert knew of Lyanna's true fate. "If it is any comfort, she is safe. When she is well enough to travel, I will allow Eddard Stark to take her home." Rhaegar did not elaborate on the Tower of Joy, or the truth of how Lyanna had come willingly, or how she had carried Rhaegar's child. That, he suspected, was a fragile truth that would only bring more strife. Lyanna's honor is unbroken, and I will not stand between her and her family. Robert's face hardened as though he'd been struck. A flurry of emotions passed over his features. Pain, yearning, confusion. Then he let out a long breath. Then let us have done with it. With difficulty, he knelt on the stone floor. His once mighty frame trembled with the strain of his injuries. He bowed his head. I, Robert of House Baratheon, do swear fealty to King Rhaegar Targaryen, to serve him and the realm, to keep the king's peace, from this day until my last day. Barristan watched solemnly, hand on the hilt of his sword. Rhaegar stepped closer, placing a hand on Robert's bowed head. I accept your fealty, Lord Baratheon. Rise, and I name you Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, as your house has always held. May we both strive to heal the wounds of this war. Robert rose unsteadily, meeting Rhaegar's gaze with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. We shall see, he muttered, voice like a distant thunder, before turning away. Barristan escorted him out. Rhaegar realized he would likely never earn Robert's friendship, but perhaps that was too much to hope for. Surviving each other might be enough for now. In the weeks that followed, ravens flew across the realm. Eddard Stark, who had been making his way south, paused upon hearing that the Mad King was deposed and that Lyanna lived. Summoned to King's Landing, he arrived with a small contingent of Northmen, hearts still burning with anger at House Targaryen for the brutal execution of Rhaegar and Brandon Stark. Yet their rage was tempered by the news that Rhaegar had turned on his father. When Ned Stark entered the Red Keep's throne room, the air was taut with expectation. Ned was as gaunt and pale as a winter pine, his eyes haunted. He bowed stiffly. Your Grace, he said, words tight. I come for my sister. Rhaegar's expression was solemn. He descended from the throne, ignoring the murmurs in the hall, and approached Ned. Lyanna is in Dorne, guarded by those loyal to me who sought only to keep her safe. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was never my wish to cause her harm. If I have wronged you or your house, I ask your forgiveness now. I cannot change the past, but I would spare the realm more violence. Ned regarded him in tense silence. The hall was so quiet that the rustle of cloaks sounded thunderous. At last, Ned nodded once, stiffly. I will see Lyanna for myself. If she is well, and if she wishes to return north, then House Stark will have no quarrel with the crown, not so long as you do not follow your father's path. Rhaegar exhaled relief in a subtle gesture. I welcome that. There is a ship at your disposal to sail for Sunspear. You will find her at the Tower of Joy on your way if you travel by land. Ser Arthur Dayne, one of the King's Guard, is sworn to protect her. He will not deny you entry. Ned's eyes flickered at the mention of Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. There was a swirl of conflicting emotions, resentment, relief, sorrow for the countless dead. Finally, he gestured to the men behind him, indicating acceptance. Then let us waste no time. I will return with my sister, and the North will decide how to move forward. I pray your words of Ace are genuine, your Grace. They are, Rhaegar said, voice low. I swear it. Ned bowed again, more out of formality than warmth, and left the throne room. The Watchers breathed easier, for the immediate threat of northern vengeance seemed to recede. Rhaegar returned to the throne, though he felt hollow. There was so much yet to mend. The realm was fractured by war, seething with grudges. The Lannisters remained aloof, Tywin neither offering open defiance nor warm support. The Tyrells, having stayed mostly loyal, now sought reward for their service. The Martells, outraged by the treatment of Elia, demanded greater autonomy or at least reassurances that Dorne would be favored. Rhaegar found himself in a sea of political demands, each one a minefield. Slowly, however, a fragile peace took shape. Robert was given leave to return to the Stormlands, though many whispered that he would never truly bend the knee in his heart. Stannis Baratheon, sullen and severe, also departed, returning to Dragonstone now that it was no longer the seat of the heir. Rhaegar intended to keep his young son Aegon in King's Landing. Eddard Stark traveled south in a grim journey to retrieve Lyanna, accompanied by his companions, men like Howland Reed and others from the north. Across the realm, fighting died down. The last pockets of resistance, those who fought for the dream of dethroning the Targaryens, melted away upon hearing that Aerys was already deposed. In King's Landing, Aerys raged in his confines, sometimes howling half the night, other times sitting in a corner muttering about betrayals and dragonfire. The new king's advisors debated quietly what to do with the deposed monarch. Execution would be monstrous and set a precedent of kinslaying, yet leaving him alive could prove equally dangerous. For the moment, Rhaegar had chosen to keep his father under careful guard, hoping that age or illness might claim him quietly or that the new king might find some more merciful solution. Amid all this, Rhaegar did what he could to restore normalcy. The royal family remained in the Red Keep. Elia Martell was crowned queen and their children recognized as heirs to the Targaryen line. Feasts were held, some small and solemn, some lavish, inviting lords from every corner to dine in the great hall and witness that the new king was not his father. Rhaegar listened earnestly to the complaints of small folk about high taxes, to the entreaties of merchants who wanted the roads made safe again, to the pleas of septas and septons who prayed for an end to the ruinous war. Through it all, Rhaegar felt a deep exhaustion as though he had aged a decade since the battle at the Trident. Late at night, when the hallways were dark, he would slip away to a quiet room where he kept his harp. Softly, he would play the melodies that once brought him solace, songs of old Valyria or the Rhoynar crossing the seas. Servants sometimes lingered by the door, drawn by the haunting music, but dared not enter. The realm's new king was gentle and sad, they whispered, a poet forced by fate into the role of conqueror. Weeks turned to months. Letters arrived from Ned Stark telling of how he found the Tower of Joy guarded by Ser Arthur Dayne, Ser Oswell Went, and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, who had been absent from King's Landing for so long. There had been a tense standoff, but after hearing Ned's demands and verifying the new king's orders, the King's Guard had stood aside, letting Ned into the tower to see Lyanna. She was alive, if weakened by childbirth. Ned's letter did not elaborate on whose child it was, but he vowed to keep the matter discreet. He only wrote that Lyanna would return to the north when she was well and that House Stark would not raise arms against King Rhaegar as long as she and her child were left in peace. The birth of Lyanna's child reverberated like a whispered storm through the Red Keep. Some suspected Rhaegar's involvement, but none dared speak openly of it, lest they undermine Elia Martell's position. For now, the matter was shrouded in secrecy, one more stone in the precarious wall that held the realm together. If that stone were removed, if Robert Baratheon learned that Lyanna bore the prince's child, the entire fragile peace might crumble. The greatest test of Rhaegar's new reign arrived in the form of Tywin Lannister. The Lord of the Rock swept into King's Landing with a retinue of 1,000 mounted knights, their crimson cloaks and gold-trimmed armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sight of them climbing Aegon's high hill filled the small folk with dread, for Tywin had once sacked the city during the reign of Aerys. But this time, the Lannisters bore no siege towers, no catapults. They came in ostensible peace to pay homage to the new king. Or so Tywin claimed. Rhaegar received him in the throne room. Lord Tywin was still a tall figure, hair receding but meticulously groomed, his green eyes cold and calculating. He wore cloth of gold doublet trimmed with crimson, and he moved with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He bowed to the new king, but it was the barest inclination of his head. Around them, the courtiers watched in hushed fascination. So it seems the realm has a new king, Tywin said in a measured tone that betrayed neither joy nor anger. May the gods bless your reign, your grace. I served as hand of the king once, as you know. I stand ready to serve again, should you desire it. Rhaegar regarded Tywin with guarded wariness. He remembered the stories of how Tywin once effectively ruled the Seven Kingdoms during the early years of Aerys' reign, earning both fear and respect. He also remembered that Tywin was father to Cersei Lannister, who once hoped to wed Rhaegar. But events had turned out differently, forging new rifts. Lord Tywin, he said politely, your reputation as hand is unmatched. Indeed, the realm prospered under your stewardship. Yet these are different times. My father's reign ended in madness. I intend to rule differently. Tywin's gaze was calculating, flicking to Elia Martell, who sat quietly on a dais beside the throne. As you wish, your grace, Tywin said with impeccable courtesy. I merely offer my services should they be required. He took a step forward, voice dropping slightly. If I might speak plainly. Rhaegar granted a small nod. The Lannister lord pressed on. Your ascendancy is new, and the realm is yet uncertain. You will need the backing of powerful allies to maintain stability. House Lannister stands ready to be that ally, under the right arrangements. My daughter, Cersei, is unwed. My son, Jaime, remains in the Kingsguard. but there are other avenues of alliance. Let us formalize our mutual goodwill to ensure that no further rebellions take root." A hush fell, and Rhaegar felt the weight of the throne upon him again. The suggestion was clear. Tywin wanted a marriage alliance, or at least some advantage, to ensure the Lannisters retained a position of primacy. Rhaegar, mindful that he already had a wife, and that his polygamous entanglement with Lyanna Stark had nearly destroyed the realm, hesitated. "Lord Tywin," he said gently, "I am grateful for your offer of support. The realm does indeed need allies. But my wife is queen, and I have no intention of seeking another match. Perhaps there are other means by which House Lannister might serve the crown." Tywin's face betrayed no emotion, though Rhaegar sensed a subtle flicker of displeasure. "Of course, your grace," Tywin said smoothly, stepping back into the ranks of his retinue. He bowed once more. "House Lannister will remember. For now, I congratulate you on your triumph and assure you of our loyalty." The tension in the room eased, and Rhaegar thanked Tywin for his courtesy, offering a lavish feast that evening. Yet behind the pleasantries, the king understood that Tywin Lannister was a force to be reckoned with, a man who had once brought a king to heel and could do so again if the moment was right. Rhaegar resolved to keep Tywin at arm's length, watchful for any sign of betrayal. The new king was learning swiftly that wearing the crown meant being surrounded by cunning wolves, lions, and serpents at every turn. As time wore on, Rhaegar labored to heal the realm. He reduced certain taxes to help the war-ravaged small folk rebuild. He dispatched the Kingsguard to root out banditry that had taken hold in the chaos of war. He summoned the High Septon to bless a new era of peace, letting the faith see that piety and justice would guide his reign more than fear. Slowly, the number of outrages reported from distant corners of Westeros began to diminish. Even Dorne, though proud and watchful, seemed content that Elia was on the throne beside her husband. Yet in the quiet recesses of the Red Keep, ghosts lingered. The ghost of the Mad King, screaming curses in his locked chamber. The ghost of Brandon Stark, strangled by the rigged contraption before the king's eyes. The ghost of Rhaegar Stark, burned alive. The ghosts of all those who died on the Trident. Rhaegar felt the weight of their specters each day, whispering that no matter how benevolent his rule, he would never wash the realm clean of such horrors. Then came the day when Eddard Stark returned to King's Landing, Lyanna Stark by his side. She was pale, as though she had seen too many nights of fever, but she stood on her own feet, her dark hair unbound around her shoulders. The hush that fell over the courtyard when the Stark siblings arrived was profound. Many courtiers gawked at Lyanna, the woman whose alleged abduction had ignited the rebellion. Now it was said she had borne a child. Rumors ran wild. Some claimed the child was Rhaegar's. Others insisted the father was a nameless Sellsword or even Robert. Only a handful knew the truth for certain. Ned and Lyanna were taken to a private audience with the king. The tension in that chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ned inclined his head. "Your Grace," he said stiffly, "I have come to return my sister to the north." Rhaegar stood, Elia at his side. Barristan Selmy hovered near, a silent sentinel. Rhaegar's heart tightened at the sight of Lyanna, who had once been the dream that haunted him, the woman he believed essential to the prophecy of ice and fire. Now, as he looked at her, he saw exhaustion etched into her features, as well as a fierce protectiveness. She clutched the memory of a newborn child she had left in Dorne, a child she knew she could not publicly claim as the king's son, for that would unravel the realm anew. "Lady Lyanna," Rhaegar said softly, "you appear in better health than when last I saw you. I trust the journey was not too burdensome." Lyanna's gaze flicked to him. Gone was the wild wolf girl who once laughed in the face of the crowd at Harrenhal. In her eyes smoldered a hurt that words could not easily soothe. "The journey was bearable, Your Grace." She hesitated, then added, "I am grateful, my brother, and I may leave without fear of harm." Rhaegar nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "There will be no harm. The war is done, and I hope you will find peace back in Winterfell." He paused, voice wavering slightly, the moment laden with all the unspoken confessions between them. "If you ever require anything, You need only send word. Ned placed a protective hand on Lyanna's shoulder. If that is all, we will depart. He glanced at Elia Martell, who stood with a silent dignity. Perhaps Ned wondered what arrangement had been reached between Rhaegar and Elia, or whether the queen harbored hatred for Lyanna. Elia's face revealed little, though a flicker of sadness touched her eyes. She, too, had lost something in this labyrinth of prophecy and love. Her husband's unspoken heart. But she had made her peace with it, or so she told herself, for the good of the realm and for her children. Yes, Rhaegar said quietly. May the gods grant you safe passage. And Ned Stark, I am truly sorry for what happened to your father and brother. I wish I could undo that evil. Ned's expression softened only marginally. They will never be forgotten, he said, voice etched with sorrow. But I accept your words, and I pray that the realm sees no further evil from the Iron Throne. Lyanna looked at Rhaegar once more, searching his face for some glimmer of the man she had once trusted. She saw only a king weighed down by fate, a father of children who could not afford the truth to be known. She swallowed, 1,000 words left unsaid. Then she turned, and together with Ned, she departed. The next morning, the Stark party left King's Landing, the dawn's light casting long shadows across the cobblestones as they rode out the gates. The city's walls seemed to release a collective breath in their wake. With Lyanna gone and Eddard Stark appeased, the war truly felt behind them. King Rhaegar focused on the task of repairing roads, forging new alliances, and placating lords who demanded recompense for the war's devastation. He formed a small council of trusted advisors, including Barristan Selmy and Prince Lewin Martell, and even gave a seat to Varys, whose network of whispers proved invaluable. Pycelle remained Grand Maester, though the old man was carefully watched. Each moon's turn, Rhaegar would sign edicts promoting reconstruction, controlling tariffs, and encouraging trade routes to flourish again. The hearts of the lords were slower to change, but coin often smoothed grievances. Beyond the capital, the Stormlands set about rebuilding under Robert Baratheon's sullen stewardship. He kept a gruff silence in his letters to the crown, acknowledging the new king's authority in public but cursing his name in private. The Reach under Mace Tyrell blossomed with new harvests, content that the Targaryen line continued. The West under Tywin Lannister remained a glittering forge of wealth, waiting for an opportune moment. In the North, Eddard Stark governed with quiet stoicism. He said little of his audience in King's Landing, and only his closest advisors knew that Lyanna had returned with a haunted look in her eyes, yet carrying the memory of her child left behind in Dorne under another name. Each Raven's arrival brought fresh challenges: banditry in the Riverlands, discontent in the Vale, rumors of Greyjoy raiders plundering unprotected coastal villages. Rhaegar did his best, though he realized that victory on the Trident was the easiest part of saving a kingdom. The real battle was against the legacy of fear and hatred his father had sown. Yet day by day, the realm settled into a fragile peace. When eventually, at a grand feast marking a year of his reign, Rhaegar rose to address a hall filled with lords and ladies. He saw fewer scowls, less suspicion. He announced new efforts to build roads and sponsor orphans of the war, and the applause was genuine. After the feast, as Rhaegar strolled through the torchlit corridors toward his private chambers, he caught his reflection in a polished suit of armor. The man staring back looked weary but resolute, silver blonde hair tied back, purple eyes carrying the weight of a crown. He recalled the day on the Trident, when Robert Baratheon's hammer had nearly ended him, and he felt a shiver at how the path of history had hinged on a single sword thrust. Another inch, and the world might have been Robert's to shape, with Targaryen heads mounted on spikes. But the gods, or fate, or mere chance had decreed otherwise. In some night's darkest hours, Rhaegar wondered if the realm would have been better off had Robert's hammer struck home. But the next morning, the realm always beckoned, with its new hopes and promises, and he found the strength to continue. Above all, he remembered the prophecy that once guided him: the dragon has 3 heads. He thought of his 2 children by Elia, Rhaenys and Aegon, and of the child born of Lyanna Stark's womb, hidden away for safety. The future might hold terrors unknown. He had read of the Great Other, the darkness in the far north beyond the wall. He had read of other portents that suggested a coming darkness that could only be opposed by a unity of ice and fire. But for now, he was content to heal the living realm, to ensure that the monstrous tragedies of the Mad King were never repeated. In the days to come, small triumphs and small tragedies would shape the new order. There would be marriages, funerals, births, and tournaments. There would be whispered conspiracies and open alliances. There would be the slow forging of an era that might eventually be called the Targaryen Restoration or the Reign of the Merciful Dragon, depending on the bards who sang of it. Yet for all of that, the realm remembered with vivid clarity the day Rhaegar Targaryen triumphed at the Trident, the single pivot on which the fortunes of Westeros had turned. And so it was that the Seven Kingdoms moved forward under King Rhaegar, a man haunted by the blood spilled and the love lost, a man determined that those ghosts should not steer the realm into ruin again. He would rule with what wisdom he possessed, trusting his heart and his harp's gentle chords to soothe the nightmares that haunted him in the quiet hours before dawn. The shape of the future was uncertain, woven in prophecy, politics, and the hearts of men, but for this fragile moment, at least, the realm stood together, neither consumed by fire nor hammered into dust. What followed would be a story still unfolding as the living realm and all its complexities tested the resolve of a king who believed he might yet mend the broken world one choice at a time. The high summer sun cast dazzling reflections off the Red Keep spires, setting the castle aglow each dawn in shades of rose and gold. Despite its grim past, the fortress looked almost serene under the rule of the new king. Word had reached every corner of the Seven Kingdoms that Aerys II Targaryen was no longer fit to wear the crown and that his son, Rhaegar Targaryen, had taken the throne by force of necessity. The transition had been less bloody than many feared. There were no wholesale purges, no savage reprisals, no unleashing of wildfire in the streets. Yet the city still trembled at every rumor that a hidden faction planned to break the new peace, that Tywin Lannister was raising more men at Casterly Rock, that Robert Baratheon itched to pick up his warhammer and march for vengeance. A thin web of alliances held the realm together. King Rhaegar's name still carried enough awe and enough threat to discourage open revolt. His defeat of Robert Baratheon at the Trident had already become legend, a pivot upon which the fate of the continent had swung. But the realm's wounds ran deep, and some doubted that even a merciful king could mend them. Gone were the days when Targaryen rule felt predestined. Now, every day of Rhaegar's reign seemed balanced on the edge of a sword, tested by lords and knights waiting to see whether this new king might falter as his father had. Rhaegar himself felt that burden keenly. Each morning, before the business of the realm began, he would rise in his private solar to watch the sunrise through narrow windows overlooking Blackwater Bay. The gulls wheeled over the water, their cries echoing in the hush. If time allowed, he would lift his silver-stringed harp and strum a few chords. The music soothed him, bringing back memories of gentler hours when he was still just a prince, entranced by prophecies and the romantic notion of saving Westeros from some distant cataclysm. Now he wore a crown, and the pressing reality of taxes, food stores, alliances, and armies overshadowed prophecy. Still, the old warnings ticked inside his mind, reminding him that external threats might someday pale against what lurked far beyond the wall. He had read the ancient texts, the old tales of the long night. Yet it was too soon to speak of that. The realm needed to be put in order first. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, Rhaegar would have set aside his harp and donned his royal attire. A black tunic embroidered with the three-headed dragon of Targaryen, breeches of sturdy leather, and over that the simple circlet of Valyrian steel that served as his crown. He'd left the grander, more twisted circlet that Aerys had worn locked away, preferring something less ominous, less reminiscent of madness. The circlet's dark metal glinted faintly as he strode through the corridors, flanked by a rotating honor guard of the King's Guard. He had assigned Barristan Selmy to be Lord Commander after Gerald Hightower's quiet resignation. The old white bull, once proud and unyielding, had been deeply shaken by the downfall of Aerys and the role he himself had played in hiding Lyanna Stark. Even so, Hightower had served Rhaegar long enough to see the new king secure on the throne. Then, on Rhaegar's leave, he had retired to the Kingsguard's white quarters within the Red Keep, rarely venturing out. Barristan, for his part, wore the white cloak with solemn resolve, grateful to see a Targaryen on the throne who might restore honor to the office. Though Rhaegar had seized power, his time was not spent feasting in triumph. He spent more of it in council chambers or receiving petitioners. Each day brought a parade of supplicants. Merchants begging for lower tolls, Riverland knights pleading for justice after their villages were pillaged by outlaws, emissaries from the Reach seeking greater favor for their support in the war, and always the matter of coin, how to replenish the royal treasury that had been bled dry by conflict. Grand Maester Pycelle, despite his penchant for bowing and fussing, remained a necessary voice on matters of tradition and law, while Lord Varys hovered at the edges, softly offering his quiet counsel whenever it could avert potential disasters. Prince Lewin Martell, who still wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard, often stood behind the king's chair. He kept a careful watch not just for physical threats but for hints of betrayal. Dorne's loyalty to the Iron Throne was strengthened by Rhaegar's marriage to Elia. Yet even Lewin knew that Dorne's pride could ignite quickly if offended. Elia Martell, now Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, led her own efforts to bring the ladies of the court into the new order. Court life had frayed under Aerys' madness, overshadowed by fear. With Rhaegar's ascension, many expected a gentler flourish in the royal halls. Elia worked tirelessly to see that the Red Keep was not just a site of grim decrees, but also a place for cultural gatherings, charitable pursuits, and carefully orchestrated feasts that brought lords and ladies together. Her health remained somewhat delicate since the births of Rhaenys and Aegon, and there was an unspoken sorrow in her eyes at the knowledge of her husband's passion for another woman. Yet she bore herself with dignity, never wincing in public, always supporting Rhaegar's reign for the sake of their children. Court whispers sometimes claimed that Elia was plotting vengeance against Lyanna Stark or that she harbored secret hatreds, but the truth was simpler. She had chosen to endure the heartbreak for the sake of peace. Her children needed a stable realm, and she believed Rhaegar meant to provide it. Such stability remained fragile. Behind the show of courtesy, many a court still looked over their shoulders. Old feuds didn't die merely because the king declared an amnesty. Some Targaryen loyalists seethed that they had endured scorn and insult from the rebels, while certain rebel sympathizers believed that Rhaegar was simply a subtler tyrant than his father. The memory of the Dunk and Egg era, a time of the monarchy balancing between tradition and reform, hovered like a distant star, tempting those who dreamed of a gentler realm. Whether Rhaegar could navigate the tangle of rivalries and come out unscathed would define the future of House Targaryen. Within the Red Keep, the question of Aerys' fate hung over them like a pall. King Rhaegar had locked his father away in guarded chambers rather than consign him to the dungeons outright, a more humane arrangement that still ensured Aerys could do no harm. The Mad King's rants could be heard echoing through the tower at times, accusations of treachery, shrill demands to be released, threats to burn every man, woman, and child who defied him. Rhaegar tried to push those ravings out of his mind as he attended to business, but late at night, when the Red Keep's corridors fell silent, the memory of that voice haunted him. Some said it would be kinder to let the old king slip away peacefully with a cup of sweet, poisoned wine, but Rhaegar could not bring himself to murder his own father, no matter how far gone Aerys was. Nor did he wish to provoke the realm's suspicion that he was a kinslayer. So Aerys lingered in those half-lit rooms, half senile and half furious, a living relic of a tyranny that refused to vanish. Seldom did Rhaegar speak of his father. With Elia, he confined the subject to glum murmurs in private. With his small council, he spoke of containing the threat. The question of executing Aerys was raised with increasing frequency whenever a new rumor of escape circulated. But Rhaegar's answer never changed, not yet, not while a shred of possibility remained that Aerys might die of natural causes and spare them all the sin. Each day, Aerys' hair grew whiter, his eyes more bloodshot, and his mind less tethered to reason. The jailers reported he sometimes didn't recognize the dawn from dusk. In a sense, the old king was dying bit by bit, consumed by his own madness. As the realm settled into an uneasy calm, the king's focus turned to external alliances. Rhaegar sought to reaffirm old pacts with the free cities, ensuring that they would not see Westeros as weakened prey. He dispatched envoys to Bravos and Pentos, bearing gifts and letters of goodwill, hoping to prevent unscrupulous self-word companies from crossing the narrow sea to carve out petty fiefdoms in the chaos. Though the rebellion was over, the cost of war had left many areas vulnerable. Rhaegar had no illusions that the land was secure. Perhaps the free cities would see that a Targaryen king once more held the throne with a firm but gentle hand. Closer to home, he also turned a watchful eye on the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy had chafed under the taxes imposed by Aerys, and while the Greyjoys had not openly joined Robert's rebellion, they had tested the crown's weakness with increased raids on unprotected coasts. Rhaegar summoned Lord Balon to King's Landing for an audience, fully expecting a clash of wills. Balon arrived with typical Iron-born swagger, flanked by grim-faced captains who scowled at the opulence of the Red Keep. They seemed unimpressed by the hush that fell whenever the new king approached. In the throne room, Balon knelt barely and offered formal words of fealty, his voice clipped. Then he made no secret of his displeasure at the taxes. "We pay our gold, and for what?" he said, his voice echoing in the hall. "My men have not served in your armies, my ships stand idle when you fight your wars. The Iron Islands do not concern themselves with the squabbles of mainlanders." Rhaegar studied him from atop the Iron Throne. He tried not to show irritation, remembering that open conflict with the Iron Islands could unleash reaving up and down the coasts, something the war-weary realm did not need. "You are part of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Balon," the king answered, voice calm. "Your men may not have marched under the crown's banner, but they reap the benefits of belonging to a united realm. The shipping lanes remain open, the merchants of Westeros do business with Pike, and no foreign army has trampled your shores." Balon's thin smile suggested he was not persuaded. He glanced around as though considering whether to voice more pointed threats. Barristan Selmy stood to the right of the throne, a hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. Prince Lewin Martell, still wearing the white cloak, observed from the other side. The air crackled with tension. Balon's men exchanged mutters, but no one stepped forward to speak. In that taut moment, Rhaegar decided to offer a minor concession, mindful that peace in the West could be easily broken if Balon's pride was not appeased. "I will consider lowering certain levies upon the Iron Islands," he said slowly, "if you commit a portion of your longships to assist in patrolling the western coasts against pirates and smugglers. Our realm must ensure the seas are safe, not merely for the crown but for every man who casts his nets or trades upon the waves." Balon's mouth twisted. "You want Ironborn ships to guard Greenlanders?" "I want the Ironborn to do their duty as part of the realm," Rhaegar said. "We all stand to gain if we show unity. House Greyjoy will be known not simply for reaving and raiding, but for safeguarding the seas. That is no small thing." Some in the hall braced for an outburst, but Balon merely inclined his head. Perhaps the mention of reaving stung his pride, or perhaps he saw a chance to present himself as more than a marauder. "Very well," he replied gruffly. "I will consider your offer. We shall see if the Ironborn can stomach it. But do not think we have forgotten the old ways." With that, the matter was left in a precarious balance. Balon departed soon after, his captains in tow, leaving Rhaegar to ponder how long the Iron Islands would remain a part of the realm in more than name. Already Rhaegar had a sense that House Greyjoy's restlessness would lead to a test of arms if the king ever appeared weak. No corner of the realm was free of tension. In the north, Eddard Stark had returned to Winterfell with Lyanna. The news that Lyanna lived and that the war was over had stirred up strong emotions among the northern lords. Some regarded the new king with cautious relief, at least the torment of Aerys had ended and at least they no longer had to march south to avenge Lyanna's honor. Others raged quietly that Rhaegar had never faced retribution for abducting her in the first place. Still, Ned Stark's endorsement of the king guarded though it was kept the region calm. The north had suffered fewer battles than the south in the rebellion, so they focused on rebuilding their own. Winterfell's larders were stocked, harvests were being prepared, and Ned turned his attention to the day-to-day governance that had once been the duty of his father. If asked about the Iron Throne, Ned would only say the war was done, as though any further reflection pained him. Lyanna, for her part, rarely appeared in public. She withdrew to the Godwood or her chambers, far from prying eyes. The rumor that she had given birth in Dorne spread like wildfire through the northern corridors, but no one dared question Ned or Lyanna about the child's fate. Gossip of half-Targaryen babes was not welcome in the austere halls of Winterfell. Meanwhile, in Dorne itself, a discreet arrangement had been made. The child of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen was entrusted to the Dornish loyalists who had once guarded Lyanna in the Tower of Joy. Ser Oswell went and a small retinue under Prince Lewin's oversight. The infant was publicly declared an orphan from some half-forgotten cousin of House Dane, though a handful of the Martells knew the truth. Word reached Rhaegar that the baby boy thrived, named Jon for the sake of subterfuge, with no lofty claims attached to him. It weighed heavily on the king's heart. He had 3 acknowledged children, Rhaenys, Aegon, and, in the original timeline, Daenerys would be born, but here Rhaella might not be pregnant anymore or might have lost that pregnancy. We do not press it. Then there was the secret child, a living testament to the prophecy that had once consumed Rhaegar's every thought. Now that prophecy lay buried beneath the rubble of war's aftermath. The king told no one, not even Elia, how often his mind drifted to that hidden son. That quiet tension between the king and queen manifested itself in small ways. Elia was never anything but courteous, and Rhaegar in turn treated her with kindness and respect. Yet the ghost of Lyanna stood between them, a wedge that no words of apology or reason could fully remove. Sometimes, as they sat in the solar with their children, Elia would notice a faraway look in Rhaegar's eyes, and she would swallow her hurt, turning her attention to Rhaenys' excited chatter or baby Aegon's attempts to walk. If Rhaegar realized how deeply it pained her, he did not show it. He had grown skilled at burying his sorrow beneath a monarch's composure. Despite these private struggles, the new king won admiration. Merchants praised him for cracking down on brigands that had terrorized trade routes during the rebellion. The faith found him pious enough, especially when he began funding small septs in the war-ravaged areas, raising hope that moral order would be restored. Even small folk, though slow to forget the horrors of war, acknowledged that King Rhaegar listened to their pleas more earnestly than the Mad King ever had. The seeds of a better age might yet bloom if the realm could hold itself together. That was the question gripping every corridor of power. Could the realm remain stable? Or would some new crisis tear it asunder? Each time a raven arrived from Casterly Rock, Rhaegar would open the scroll with a sense of mingled caution and curiosity. Tywin Lannister had offered his nominal support when Rhaegar took the throne, but the old lion was not the sort to remain quietly in his den while the game of power played out. He had not demanded the post of hand outright, but courtiers whispered that Tywin fully intended to retake that office and steer the realm as he had in the early reign of Aerys. Instead, Rhaegar had given the hand's chain to Lord Carlton Chelsted, one of the few men who had openly defied Aerys' cruelty, resigning before being executed, except Rhaegar's coup had spared him that fate. Chelsted was a decent, if somewhat colorless, steward of the realm, lacking Tywin's commanding presence but also lacking his ruthlessness. The day that appointment was announced, a wave of rumor had spread through the capital. Tywin Lannister would not forgive such an insult. In those first months, Tywin confined his displeasure to subtle barbs in his letters and hints that the crown's finances were precarious. Indeed, the monarchy owed the Iron Bank of Bravos a staggering amount, and the Lannisters, with their gold mines, had previously been the main lenders to the crown. Now, with Tywin out of favor, that spigot threatened to close. Rhaegar recognized the danger but could not simply hand Tywin the keys to the kingdom. Instead, Rhaegar sought to negotiate fresh loans from the Iron Bank based on the promise of a more stable Targaryen reign. Pycelle proved oddly useful in these negotiations, scribbling lengthy letters extolling Rhaegar's virtues. Varys quietly arranged a meeting with Bravosi bankers who arrived in secret, appraising the new king in person. Rhaegar found them shrewd and circumspect, but not hostile. They, like everyone else, simply wanted to see if this Targaryen regime would endure. For the moment, they were willing to extend partial credit. That small victory kept the crown solvent, if only just. But finances were not the only concern. The king heard persistent rumors of bandit lords in the Riverlands who refused to yield, terrorizing small villages and then vanishing into the forests. Some said they were the remnants of Beric Dondarrion's men, though Beric himself had never been a true outlaw. Others whispered that these roving brigands might owe fealty to some cunning local lord who chafed under Targaryen rule. When Rhaegar summoned Hoster Tully to account for his region, the Lord Paramount assured him that the Tully bannermen were working tirelessly to quell these outlaws. Still, Rhaegar could see in Tully's eyes a hint of strain. Hoster knew that the Riverlands were battered by too many armies passing through during the rebellion, and an undercurrent of resentment simmered. It would take time for the scars to fade. The king did not forget the Stormlands, either. Robert Baratheon, bearing the new title of Lord Paramount and Warden of the Stormlands, lurked in Storm's End with a bitter heart. He had bent the knee in the king's own chambers, but his resentment ran deep. Some of his letters to the crown were polite, even formal, acknowledging royal directives about taxes or local governance, but they arrived rarely and always felt forced. Rhaegar suspected that Robert's pride had been wounded in a way that might never heal. Even so, the king made sure to recognize the Stormlands' importance. He sent gifts of gold to help with reconstruction, knowing the region had been a battlefield in parts. He also offered to have Maester Pylus from the Citadel assigned to Storm's End to aid with the local ravens. Robert accepted such gestures but gave little thanks in return. Occasionally, Rhaegar would recall the fierce strength with which Robert had fought him on the trident, the brute power of that warhammer swinging, the unstoppable wrath fueled by heartbreak for Lyanna. It had taken every ounce of Rhaegar's skill to outmatch him. With time and healing, would Robert's rage cool, or would it smolder until he found a spark to try once more? Men with deep scars rarely forgot them. Rhaegar thought of the lines from an old song, "Fire can be quenched, but the embers remain until a fresh wind makes them burn anew." So it might be with Robert. As for the Vale, Jon Arryn remained Warden of the East. Rhaegar had not forgotten that Jon Arryn had been the early catalyst of the rebellion by refusing Aerys' demand to yield Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. Still, Aeron was older and perhaps more measured than Robert. He sent polite messages pledging loyalty to King Rhaegar, but he also made sure the Vale's knights stood ready to defend their passes. In truth, the Vale had not suffered as grievously as other regions, and so they posed less of a threat, but they also had less cause to adore the Targaryens. Rhaegar believed that Jon Arryn was a man of principle, the sort who could uphold a peace if he deemed the king just. So he tried to keep lines of communication open, sending courteous gifts and occasionally praising Arryn's leadership. If Aeryn seemed guarded, that was understandable. He had watched the realm nearly tear itself apart, and it would take more than promises for him to trust the Iron Throne again. All the while, life within King's Landing took on a semblance of routine. The stonemasons repaired the gates and ramparts that had been scorched during earlier unrest. The markets thrived again, though they remained cramped and pungent with waste. Street performers returned to ply their craft in the squares, and new songs praising King Rhaegar's mercy sprang up, though cynics called them propaganda. Through the hot days of summer, the city's wells and cisterns sometimes ran low, prompting King Rhaegar to commission new aqueducts and deeper wells. He wanted the people to feel that the crown cared for their welfare. He had seen too often how a desperate populace could be swayed by rebellion. The memory of how many once flocked to Robert's banner was not lost on him. He also encouraged the resumption of tourneys, believing that a shared celebration of knightly prowess might ease tensions. The first grand tourney of his reign took place at Maidenpool, where Lord Mouton oversaw the festivities. Knights Fr. Om the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands competed, though many northern and Dornish knights stayed away, citing the expense or distance. Still, the spectacle drew hundreds of onlookers, and bards sang that King Rhaegar wanted to unite the realm in sport, not war. Rhaegar attended for a day, bringing Queen Elia and their children. The crowd cheered to see him, especially when he rode out in ceremonial armor to greet the assembled knights. He did not compete. Some speculated he feared being unseated, while others said he merely did not wish to overshadow the contestants. Either way, his presence lent the event a glow of royal favor. At that tourney, a young knight from the Stormlands, Gyard Morrigan, won the melee in a display that left watchers breathless. He unhorsed 3 experienced knights in quick succession, his shield bearing the crowned raven of House Morrigan. In the joust, however, the champion emerged from the Westerlands, a charismatic Lannister cousin named Davin, rumored to be distantly related to Tywin. This Lannister wore bright crimson armor and unhorsed every foe. After the final tilt, with the crowd roaring, Davin Lannister bowed low to King Rhaegar, dedicating his victory to the health of the new realm. It was all courtesy and smiles, but Rhaegar saw behind the bright pageantry an echo of Tywin's watchfulness, a reminder that House Lannister was still hungry for status. Even in the lists, politics raged. When the tourney concluded, Rhaegar and his retinue prepared to return to King's Landing. The king lingered a moment by his horses, the wind off the bay rustling his silver-blonde hair. As the small folk crowded around, calling blessings, Rhaegar noticed a woman with tear-streaked cheeks, cradling a child too thin for his years. She knelt as he approached, holding out a ragged scrap of parchment. "Please, your grace," she said, voice trembling. "My husband was taken by outlaws on the river road. They say they won't free him unless I pay them in gold. I've nowhere to turn." Rhaegar paused, conscious of Barristan's presence behind him and the courtiers watching. He bent to accept the parchment, seeing it was a scrawled demand for coin. He handed it to Barristan. Then he looked at the woman and her child, saw the raw desperation in their eyes. "We will find these outlaws," Rhaegar promised, voice firm. "Ser Barristan, have the gold cloaks coordinate with Lord Mouton and the local lords. Let us do what we can to return her husband safely." She let out a sob of relief, but others in the crowd pressed forward, each with stories of woe. Bandits, starving fields, burdensome taxes. Rhaegar felt overwhelmed by the wave of need, the manifestation of a realm still reeling from civil war. He could only speak words of sympathy and vow to do his best. Later, on the ride back, he confided to Barristan that he feared no single king could address every injustice. Barristan responded gently that every king in history confronted that same truth, and it was the mark of a good one that he kept trying. Summer's heat gave way to the crisp breezes of autumn. Harvest wagons creaked through the roads, bringing produce to the city. For the first time in years, King's Landing did not seem to be on the brink of famine. Rhaegar saw to it that the crown purchased surplus grain to store in the city's granaries, mindful that a winter might come that was harder than the realm had seen in a decade. The small folk took this as a sign that the king was preparing for the future, not merely living in the moment. Rumors of a potential spring or a mild winter rose, but no one could say for certain. After all, the maesters alone read the complex signs of the seasons, and even they admitted it was a guess. With autumn came a flurry of diplomatic visitors. The Prince of Dorne, Doran Martell, ventured north to pay respects to his sister, Queen Elia, and to reaffirm Dornish loyalty. The subtle, thoughtful Doran made a favorable impression at court, though he traveled slowly due to his gout. He also spent long hours speaking privately with Rhaegar, discussing how best to keep Dorne integrated in a realm that had so often chafed against Targaryen rule. In those talks, Doran gently pressed for more autonomy, for instance, the right to maintain separate laws on inheritance and trade. Rhaegar was inclined to grant certain freedoms in Dorne, recognizing that the Martells had always been half-independent in custom if not in name. Prince Lewin Martell, who remained in the Kingsguard, also gave quiet counsel, reminding Rhaegar that Dorne's loyalty hinged on mutual respect. Though Rhaegar trod carefully, he extended a few privileges that satisfied Doran, such as easing the restrictions on Dornish ports trading with Essos. As a result, Dorne's delegates left King's Landing in a warmer mood, praising the new king's sense of fairness. Shortly thereafter, another visitor arrived. The High Septon himself, carried from Old Town in a grand litter accompanied by a retinue of septas and warriors' sons. He came to formally bless the realm under its new ruler and to hold a public ceremony in the Great September of Baelor. This was a chance for Rhaegar to affirm the crown's bond with the faith. The ceremony itself was magnificent, the Great September decked in candles and fresh flowers, the ringing of bells echoing through the streets. Even the most jaded court cynics were moved by the spectacle of King Rhaegar kneeling for the High Septon's blessing, calling upon the Seven to guide his rule. By reinforcing his piety, Rhaegar hoped to quell the still-whispered heresy that he had stolen another man's betrothed and fathered a child out of wedlock. If the Seven had forgiven him, or so the ceremony implied, who was any mortal to question it? In the swirling aftermath of that ceremony, as the city rang with bells, the king hosted a feast in honor of the High Septon. Lords, ladies, and commoners alike crowded the squares near the Red Keep, celebrating well into the night. Music drifted across the battlements and fires burned in braziers to keep away the autumn chill. Rhaegar sat at the high table, Elia beside him, Prince Rhaenys and Prince Aegon further down with their royal governesses. Musicians played lutes and drums. Court jesters tumbled across the floor. Even Pycelle smiled in the candlelight, raising a cup to toast the king's health. It was, by all accounts, a resplendent evening, a sign of a peaceful, prosperous future. And yet, as the hours wore on, Rhaegar found himself gazing into the swirl of dancers and courtiers with a distant expression. It was not that he disliked the celebration. He wanted the realm to rejoice. But something about the revelry felt hollow. The ghosts of the recent past were not so easily banished by wine and song. Across the hall, he glimpsed a group of knights from the Reach laughing boisterously with a handful of Westerlanders, no doubt forging alliances while pretending to share jokes. He imagined how swiftly that laughter could turn to the clash of steel if tensions ever flared again. He pictured Robert Baratheon in Storm's End, hearing of this feast and gritting his teeth, the memory of the trident fresh in his mind. At one point, Elia's hand found his under the table, a gentle squeeze. He turned to her, offering a faint smile. She understood, in her quiet way, that though the war had ended, the king fought a new kind of battle, one of diplomacy, memory, and the realm's fragile hopes. That night, after the feast ended and the final guests trudged back to their chambers, Rhaegar climbed to the ramparts alone. He looked out over King's Landing, seeing the pinpricks of torchlight from the last revelers wandering the streets. The wind carried the faint smell of the Blackwater. For a moment, he closed his eyes and pictured how different the city might have looked if Robert had prevailed. Perhaps the banners of Baratheon would have flown from the Red Keep, or perhaps the city would have been sacked anew in the chaos. Thousands of lives teetering on the edge. He exhaled and whispered a prayer to the Seven that his reign would spare the realm more carnage. Winter drew closer, and the leaves turned red and orange in the Kingswood. Reports from the north suggested the cold might be harsher than expected, and so Rhaegar hastened his preparations, ensuring that the crown's granaries were filled, that shipments of wheat from the Reach and barley from the Riverlands were transported south in time. This practical, unglamorous work became the staple of his day, a far cry from the heroic visions that once danced in his mind when he read the scrolls of prophecy. Occasionally, he would recall the line about the prince that was promised and wonder if it meant anything now. He had fathered 3 children if one counted the hidden boy in Dorne. The prophecy had spoken of the dragon having 3 heads. Did that mean they would unite the realm to face a future threat? Or had it simply been a dream conjured by old mystics? He did not know. He only knew that he could not neglect the present for the sake of prophecy. Amid these concerns came word from the north of an impending birth in the Stark household. Lady Catelyn Tully wed to Ned's brother Brandon Stark in the original timeline, but that changed. Wait, no. Brandon was killed. Actually, in the canon timeline, Catelyn married Ned after Brandon's death. Let's remain lore accurate. Brandon was executed by Aerys. Ned married Catelyn, right? So Lady Catelyn Tully was now Lady Stark, and rumor said she was with child. The lords of the north looked forward to an heir who might carry the bloodline forward, softening the tragedies that had befallen House Stark. Rhaegar felt a pang of guilt at the mention of the Stark name. Yet if Ned and Catelyn's child was healthy, it meant new hope for a house that had lost too many to the fires of Aerys. He was reminded that, in time, Robert Baratheon would likely wed as well. The Storm Lord was in his mid-20s, strong, and presumably ready to father heirs of his own. Gossip suggested he might take a bride from the Reach or the Westerlands, forging alliances that could, one day, rival the crown if Robert nurtured any ambition of revenge. Rhaegar had to weigh every rumor carefully. He had no desire to meddle in Robert's personal affairs, but if Robert secured a marriage pact with House Tyrell or House Lannister, the realm's balance of power could shift. And though Robert had sworn fealty, men had broken oaths before. Thus the court greeted with great curiosity a letter from Storm's End announcing the betrothal of Robert Baratheon to one of the younger Redwyne twins from the Arbor, either horror or relief, depending on one's perspective. The Arbor was wealthy and influential in the Reach, though not as powerful as Highgarden. It suggested that Robert was seeking the coin and influence of House Redwyne without directly allying himself to Mace Tyrell. Some at court interpreted this as a sign that Robert wanted to remain somewhat independent. Rhaegar cared little for the specifics, so long as the betrothal signaled that Robert was building a normal life rather than plotting war. Publicly, he sent polite congratulations. Privately, he instructed Varys to keep an ear open for any hint that this betrothal might mask more ambitious designs. In mid-autumn, a raven arrived from Winterfell with surprising news. Ned Stark requested an audience in King's Landing. He did not specify the reason, only that it concerned a matter of great importance. Rhaegar felt an immediate spike of tension. Could the North be preparing to challenge the crown or break from the realm? That seemed unlikely, given Ned's temperament. More likely, something else had occurred. Perhaps news of Lyanna's child in Dorne, or a problem with White Harbor or the Bolton Lords. Rhaegar steeled himself and sent a courteous reply, inviting Ned to come whenever he wished. Preparations were made to host the Northern Lord, though the king insisted it be kept discreet, suspecting Ned might not want a large reception. When Ned Stark finally arrived, the city was shrouded in gray skies and swirling leaves. His party was small, just a handful of men-at-arms and a few northern courtiers. They wore cloaks of thick wool and carried themselves with the understated solemnity typical of the North. Ned himself looked more worn than before, lines etched around his eyes. He bowed stiffly to the king in the throne room, then stood with shoulders squared, waiting for Rhaegar to dismiss the onlookers before he spoke. Sensing the need for privacy, Rhaegar nodded to the assembled knights and courtiers, sending them away. Only Barristan Selmy and Prince Lewin Martell remained by the king's side, along with Varys lurking at the periphery. Ned did not object to their presence, though he cast a wary glance at Varys. When they were alone, Rhaegar spoke softly. "Lord Stark, you are welcome here, though you come unexpectedly. What weighs on your mind?" Ned hesitated. Rhaegar saw him gather resolve. "Your Grace, I bring news from my sister. It has been some time since she returned to the north. She has spoken of certain truths that weigh heavily on her conscience." He paused as though choosing each word carefully. "She told me of the child she bore while in Dorne." Rhaegar felt his heart thump. Lewin Martell shifted behind him. Even Barris and Selmy's posture stiffened. Varys, from the corner of the hall, lowered his head slightly as if this was the moment he had anticipated. Rhaegar took a breath. I see. And does she mean to reveal this publicly? Ned's gray eyes met Rhaegar's. She does not wish to provoke turmoil in the realm. She knows how precarious things are. But it torments her to think of her child growing up far from home, hidden. She asked me to speak on her behalf, to request that the boy be allowed to come north, where he might be raised quietly under the Stark banner with no public claim on the throne. Lyanna says that she has no intention of undermining Queen Elia or your lawful heirs. She only wishes to have her son near. Silence hung in the vaulted throne room. Rhaegar had suspected this day would come, but hearing Ned say the words felt like a blow to the chest. Many swirling thoughts fought for dominance, his love for the child, the precarious political ramifications, the vow he made to keep the child's existence secret to maintain peace. If the realm learned that Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark had a living son, it might reignite the embers of war. Men who had followed Robert might bristle at the notion that the Targaryens had effectively stolen not only a Stark daughter but sired an heir with her as well. Dorne, too, might see it as an affront to Elia and her children. But to deny Lyanna all contact with her son seemed cruel beyond measure, especially given that she had never asked for the war that had consumed them. Ned watched him steadily. I cannot claim to know your heart in this, your grace. But I do know my sister would never threaten the peace of the realm. If you fear the child might pose a threat to your heirs, the boy need never know his true paternity. In the north, secrets can be kept. He would be raised as a distant cousin of House Stark, or perhaps as a ward if you prefer. No banners would proclaim him a Targaryen. Barristan shifted uneasily. He knew how complicated the succession could become if the child's parentage were ever revealed. Prince Lewin said nothing, though his eyes flicked from Ned to Rhaegar, measuring the gravity of this moment. Varys was the one who finally spoke, his voice a soft whisper that carried nonetheless. Your grace, the realm's peace is a fragile tapestry. One thread pulled and it could unravel. Yet if Lady Lyanna remains in anguish, that too might fester into bitterness. Perhaps a discreet compromise might be found. Rhaegar took a moment to steady himself. A compromise, he murmured. Lord Stark, I do not doubt your sincerity, nor your sister's. But you must know how delicate this is. The boy's existence is known to only a few. Even among those few, some might seize upon it to undermine my queen or sow discord among the great houses. Ned inclined his head gravely. I am aware, your grace. Still, my sister is his mother, and to deny her the child might one day lead her to speak openly in desperation. Rhaegar's mind flew to visions of Robert Baratheon hearing of this child and howling for Targaryen blood anew, or Tywin Lannister using it as leverage to demand more power. Even in the north, if word slipped out, old wounds could reopen. Yet Lyanna deserved some measure of happiness. She had already sacrificed so much. If he refused Ned's request outright, there was no telling what sorrow or resentment that might breed. For a moment, Rhaegar closed his eyes. He saw the memory of Lyanna in a twilight garden, her laughter like distant bells. He had once believed the songs that love could save the realm. Instead, that love had nearly torn it apart. At length he nodded. Very well, he said quietly. I will not forbid the child from knowing his mother. But how to accomplish this without rousing suspicion? Ned's shoulders slackened a fraction, relief in his eyes. We might say that the boy is the orphan of a loyal retainer to House Stark who died in the war. My sister could claim a special fondness for the child. She has always had a tender heart. If anyone questions it, she can say she adopted him out of pity for his plight. Rhaegar glanced at Prince Lewin. Your cousin, Princess Elia, entrusted the child's well-being to us all. Would removing him from Dorne cause a rift? Lewin folded his arms. Dorne will always defend Elia's children above all. But the child in question is not publicly hers. As far as official records go, he is the orphan of a minor retainer in service to House Dane. Dorne will not risk strife if the boy simply disappears from the public eye. That said, the men who guard him may grow curious. They are loyal to the crown. We would have to dispatch them discreetly or else arrange for them to receive orders from King Rhaegar himself. Varys interjected, voice hushed. Such an arrangement could be done quietly with a small escort. The boy travels north with Ned Stark, who claims guardianship. In time, the North's natural isolation can help bury questions. Rhaegar pressed his fingertips to his temples. This must be done without my queen's knowledge. If she learns the boy was fathered by me and is being sent north, it might reopen wounds between us. She is a proud woman, and she has endured enough heartbreak. Ned nodded. I will not speak a word of it to her or to any soul outside my family. We will keep the secret as we keep our words. The king felt the weight of the decision settle on him like a lead mantle. Yet what other path existed? To keep the child hidden away in Dorne, never seeing his mother, was cruelty. To publicly acknowledge him would risk the realm's stability. This middle way was the least terrible of many terrible choices. So be it, he said at last. We will arrange it. Ned closed his eyes briefly in relief, then bowed. Thank you, your grace. I will not forget this mercy toward my sister. That night, the hush in the Red Keep felt deeper than usual. Rhaegar paced his chambers, torn between dread and a strange sense of solace. At least now Lyanna would be reunited with their son, albeit in secrecy. Was that a step toward healing, or another seed of conflict waiting to sprout? He gazed at the flickering candle on his desk, recalling the lines of the prophecy that had once guided him. Perhaps the child was meant to be raised in the north, away from the machinations of the south. Perhaps the Lord of Winterfell could protect him from the realms. Cruelties. Rhaegar sighed and told himself that if the prophecy mattered, fate would find its way. His duties now lay in ruling a realm battered by war and suspicion. Within a fortnight, the arrangements were made. Ned Stark departed King's Landing with a secret letter sealed by the king's own hand, addressed to the men guarding the boy in Dorne. The letter authorized them to relinquish custody of the child to Ned Stark, who would assume guardianship in the name of the crown. To ensure no rumors spread, they traveled under the cover of darkness and used a circuitous route that led them nowhere near King's Landing again. The official story was that Ned was returning north after visiting the king, stopping in Dorne purely for courtesy's sake. A small retinue of loyal Targaryen guards accompanied him, men who had been carefully instructed to keep silent by Prince Lewin. Rhaegar told no one else, not even Barristan and Selmy or Prince Lewin, the details, though Lewin guessed enough. Elia Martell was left in the dark. Rhaegar felt a pang of guilt each time he looked into her eyes, but he told himself it was necessary. If she did not know, she could not be forced to confirm or deny anything. The child was not hers, and her heart had been strained enough. For all that, Rhaegar hated the secrecy. Yet he hated more the thought of what would happen if the truth came out. Once Ned was gone, life in the capital continued with the measured rhythms of the changing season. Rhaegar redoubled his efforts at governance, immersing himself in the daily minutiae, the price of grain, the distribution of gold cloaks, negotiations with the Vale and the Westerlands. Winter's approach brought an early bite to the air, and the king wore a heavier cloak lined with fur to ward off the chill. Days grew shorter, shadows longer. In the evenings, he would sit with Elia at dinner, conversing politely about the day's events. She was gracious, never pressing him about matters that might weigh on his soul. Still, he sensed her noticing how his mind wandered. Sometimes she would glance at him with sad eyes, as if to say, "You hide secrets from me, but I will not force your hand." One dusk, as the final glow of sun lit the windows of the royal solar, Elia approached him where he stood by the brazier. Outside, the wind keened against the stone. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Will you come to bed soon?" she asked softly. He turned, forcing a small smile. "Yes. Soon." A flicker of guilt moved through him, recalling the child in Dorne, soon to be in the north. Could Elia sense how that weighed on him? "I was merely thinking of how far we have come." She nodded, dark hair catching the firelight. "We have come far indeed. Yet it feels as though we are never free of the war's aftermath." He wanted to tell her that he was sorry, that he had never wished to wound her. But words failed him, so he merely leaned to kiss her brow. "We shall do our best, Elia," he murmured. "For our children's sake and for the realm's." She seemed to accept that, for she squeezed his hand and left him to his thoughts. He watched her go, the warmth of her presence lingering in the air. After a moment, he turned back to the brazier, letting the heat wash over him. A memory stirred, Lyanna Stark's face in the tower, the smell of roses in the yard at Harrenhal, the music he had played that day. He closed his eyes, letting the ache sink in, then opened them again. Duty called him. He doused the brazier and made his way to bed, reminding himself that tomorrow was another day of rulership and he could not falter. As the moon waxed, news trickled in that Ned Stark had passed safely through the Prince's Pass and was returning north with minimal fanfare. Rhaegar's chest felt lighter, knowing the child was likely in Ned's care by now, spared the intrigues of court. Meanwhile, the king had enough intrigues of his own. One morning, Carlton Chelstead, the Hand, arrived with a pale face and urgent tidings. New reports indicated that Tywin Lannister was marshalling an unusually large number of troops at Casterly Rock. Officially, the Lannisters claimed it was to deal with a spike in banditry near the borders of the Reach. But the numbers rumored, some said over 15,000 men, exceeded any normal need for local policing. This raised eyebrows in King's Landing. Was Tywin preparing for a move against Highgarden, or was he preparing to challenge the crown? Rhaegar summoned an emergency council. Barristan, Lewin, Pycelle, Varys, and Chelstead assembled in the small council chamber, torches flickering. The king sat at the head of the table, swirling a cup of watered wine between his hands. "Why would Lord Tywin gather so many men?" he asked quietly, letting the question linger. Chelstead cleared his throat. "He claims it is to root out outlaws and savage sellswords who drifted from the war. But that many men seems excessive." Varys dipped his head in a subtle nod. "My little birds suggest Lord Tywin may be sending a message that the Lannisters remain the greatest military power outside the throne. No immediate aggression is confirmed, but caution is warranted." Barristan rubbed his chin. "If Tywin wishes to press a claim of influence over the throne, he may attempt to strong-arm a seat on the council or the handship. If refused, he might threaten war. There is also the matter of Prince Aegon's future betrothal. Some in the Westerlands may hope for a marriage alliance that ties the crown to Casterly Rock." Rhaegar frowned. He had not contemplated betrothing his young son so soon. Aegon was but a toddler after all. "Marrying my heir to a Lannister might enrage Dorne," he pointed out softly. "And if I appear to yield to Tywin's demands, the other great houses will see me as weak. They will think me no different than my father, who once ceded so much power to Tywin that men said the hand ruled in all but name." Prince Lewin folded his arms, eyes narrowed. "We must show Tywin that the Iron Throne will not be cowed. Yet we cannot risk open confrontation unless we are certain he intends rebellion. The realm is still too fragile. Another war could ignite the entire continent." Rhaegar studied the council's faces. Each man understood the precarious nature of the situation. Finally, the king set his wine aside. "Lord Tywin served as hand for many years. He is proud, shrewd, and unlikely to accept a diminished role. But if we challenge him directly, he may turn to open treason. If we give him too much, we hand him the keys to the kingdom. A middle course is needed." Varys's voice slithered into the hush. "Perhaps a gesture of respect, your grace, without ceding the realm's power. Invite Lord Tywin to court, let him display his retinue and speak his mind. Keep him close, where we can watch him and then evaluate whether his intentions are truly hostile." Rhaegar tapped the table thoughtfully. He might refuse the summons, which would be telling in itself. Or if he comes, he might interpret the invitation as a chance to press his demands in person. Still, it may be the best option to keep peace. If we show no fear and no hostility, Tywin might hesitate to make a move. Barristan nodded slowly. "Caution is key, but readiness as well. We should ensure our own forces are prepared in case. The gold cloaks must be properly armed, and we might quietly summon loyal bannermen closer to King's Landing under some pretext, so if Tywin tries anything, we are not caught unawares." So it was decided. A letter was penned in the king's name, inviting Tywin Lannister to attend court in the new year for the celebration of Prince Aegon's third name day. "It would please us greatly, Lord Tywin, if you and your noble kin would join us in recognizing this joyous occasion," it read, couched in all the formal language appropriate for a man of Tywin's stature. The letter carried no overt mention of Tywin's troop movements or the crown's concerns. Better to keep it friendly on the surface and see how the lion would respond. After the ravens departed, the king ordered a discreet strengthening of the city's defenses. More men were drilled, the city gates inspected, stocks of wildfire in the pyromancer's vaults inventoried. Rhaegar loathed the stuff, but he needed to know it was secure lest it fall into the wrong hands. The lords loyal to Rhaegar were quietly encouraged to rotate fresh troops near the capital, House Rosby, House Hayford, House Massey, each providing a small garrison so that no single house overshadowed the others. To outsiders, it might appear the king was simply rotating the capital's guardians, but the message to Tywin was clear: King's Landing would not be undefended. Days passed in a tense waiting game. Finally, a raven came from Casterly Rock, bearing Tywin's crest. The gist of the letter was an acceptance of the king's gracious invitation, with a polite pledge to attend. No mention of the large standing forces was made, no hint of aggression. It was, in effect, a neutrality or courtesy. The game would play out face-to-face in King's Landing. Rhaegar braced himself, remembering the cunning Tywin had displayed across decades. He confided to Barristan that, although his father's tyranny was behind them, the realm might still be shaped or broken by the struggle between the dragon and the lion. As autumn gave way to the earliest chills of winter, the capital prepared for the name day festivities. Queen Elia oversaw the details of a modest but elegant celebration for Prince Aegon, determined not to be ostentatious in a time when much of the realm still struggled. Cakes were baked, decorations readied, and minstrels rehearsed new songs praising the young prince's bright future. Rhaegar wondered, with a twinge of irony, how many of these singers had once composed ballads exalting Robert's cause during the war. Even bards followed the winds of fortune. Meanwhile, a hush of anticipation spread among the higher lords and ladies of the realm, those who could sense that Tywin Lannister's arrival would be more than a mere courtesy call. Some speculated that Tywin might demand a betrothal to Princess Rhaenys or a seat on the small council as Master of Coin, or even try to supplant Carlton Chelstead's hand. Others whispered that he would challenge the king to name Jaime Lannister, still bound by the Kingsguard oath, to a higher place at court. The tension thickened as ravens brought news that Tywin would travel with a large retinue, supposedly to display proper respect. 10 days before the named day, scouts reported that a glittering column of knights in crimson cloaks marched along the Gold Road, nearing the city. They arrived on a gray morning, the sky hanging low with clouds. Rhaegar stood on the ramparts, gazing down at the approach. A horn sounded from the city watch. Thousands of men in Lannister livery moved in disciplined ranks, though only a fraction were actually entering the city. The rest would make camp outside the walls. At the head of the column rode Tywin himself, clad in gleaming plate chased with gold, a cloak of crimson draped over his broad shoulders. His stern face betrayed no emotion as he neared the gates. At his side rode his daughter Cersei, regal in a crimson gown that offset her golden hair. Jaime Lannister, famously known as the youngest member of the Kingsguard, was absent. He remained in King's Landing, now sworn to Rhaegar. Tyrion, Tywin's dwarf son, did not appear. Rumor said he was kept out of public view. Kevan Lannister, Tywin's loyal brother, rode behind him, along with other bannermen and knights. Inside the city, the gold cloaks had lined the main thoroughfare to ensure order. Crowds gathered to watch, uncertain whether to cheer or keep silent. Many recognized Tywin Lannister's fearsome reputation, recalling how he sacked King's Landing during Robert's rebellion in the original timeline. Though in this timeline that event never occurred, yet rumors of his brutality persisted from earlier times, such as the sack of Castamere. The memory of how Aerys once mistrusted Tywin also lingered. That day, however, Tywin's face remained impassive, ignoring the murmuring crowds. He and a select group of nobles rode straight to the Red Keep, where the king awaited them in the yard. Rhaegar stood flanked by Barristan Selmy and Prince Lewin Martell. Behind them were the standard-bearers with the Targaryen dragon. Elia Martell stood slightly back with Rhaenys and Aegon. Trumpets sounded a brassy fanfare. Tywin dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to a squire. Then he walked forward with measured steps, stopping a few paces before the king. Court protocol demanded a bow, and so Tywin inclined his head. Not too deeply, not enough to suggest humility, but enough to fulfill etiquette. "Your Grace," Tywin said in a clear voice, "House Lannister offers its respects on this auspicious occasion of Prince Aegon's name day." Rhaegar dipped his head in turn. "Lord Tywin, you honor us with your presence. Be welcome in King's Landing." Their eyes met, neither man betraying the currents of thought beneath the surface. Tywin's pale green stare was as unreadable as always, though a slight curl of his mouth might have hinted at satisfaction. Rhaegar maintained a calm veneer. He stepped aside, gesturing for Tywin to join the royal family inside the keep, where a welcome feast awaited. The watchers exhaled. So far, no sparks, no challenge. The lion's claws remained sheathed. That evening, in the Great Hall, the Lannister retinue joined other nobles from across the realm for a grand welcoming banquet. Musicians played softly, servants bustled with trays of roasted boar and spiced wine, and the high table gleamed with candles. Tywin sat to the king's right, Queen Elia to the king's left. Cersei Lannister, radiant in red and gold, was seated near Prince Rhaenys, who eyed her with a child's curiosity. The conversation was polite, if somewhat stilted. Mace Tyrell, who had also come for the name day, looked on with faint displeasure at seeing Tywin so close to the king. But none dared cause a scene. Midway through the feast, when the hall's noise was at its peak, Tywin leaned toward Rhaegar. "Your Grace, I thank you for your invitation. My men will be no burden. They will make camp outside the city walls and remain only as long as necessary to see the celebrations concluded." Rhaegar sipped from his goblet. "We are pleased to have you," he replied, mindful of every nuance. "I trust matters in the Westerlands are well?" Tywin allowed a tight smile. "We have had our share of troubles, bandits mostly, and the lingering aftereffects of the war. Yet with proper leadership we endure. The subtle jab was evident. Tywin believed the realm lacked proper leadership, or at least that the king's leadership needed the lion's guiding hand. Rhaegar remained impassive, acknowledging the remark only with a slight nod. If there is anything the crown can do to assist, you need only speak. Tywin's gaze slid around the hall before resting on the king again. In truth, there is one matter that weighs on me. My son, Jaime, is sworn to the Kingsguard. He took that vow in the final madness of your father's reign, at Aerys' insistence. For a time, it seemed an honor to serve in the royal guard, but times change. Rhaegar set down his goblet, tensing. Jaime Lannister was one of the realm's most gifted swordsmen, though a youth. He had sworn his vows, and in so doing, he renounced any claim to inherit Casterly Rock. Many whispered that Aerys had insisted on Jaime's appointment precisely to wound Tywin, robbing him of his heir. Now, Tywin might attempt to reverse that. Times do change, Rhaegar said carefully. Yet a Kingsguard vow is for life. Tywin's composure never slipped. Indeed, but the king is the fount of honor. With your royal blessing, Jaime's vow might be set aside, allowing him to return to Casterly Rock and fulfill his duties as heir. Another worthy knight could be raised to the Kingsguard in his place. Surely there are many who would be honored by such an appointment. Silence hung in the noise of the banquet. Rhaegar understood the significance. If he freed Jaime from the Kingsguard, Tywin would secure the future of House Lannister through Jaime's inheritance. At the same time, the king would lose one of the realm's finest swords in his personal guard. And the precedent that a Kingsguard vow could be undone was not lightly dismissed. It might weaken the sanctity of that white cloak. Yet refusing Tywin might confirm the suspicion that the crown intended to keep the Lannisters in check. Rhaegar needed to choose carefully. He studied Tywin's face, considering. I will need time to ponder such a request, he said at last. Ser Jaime has served capably. The Kingsguard is not merely an honor. It is a binding duty to protect the crown. I cannot dissolve that vow lightly. Tywin inclined his head in polite acceptance. I understand, Your Grace, but do consider that Ser Jaime was scarcely more than a boy when he swore to serve Aerys, an oath demanded by a mad king. Could we not rectify that injustice and allow him to serve you in other ways? A swirl of tension underlay Tywin's smooth words. Rhaegar recognized the gambit. If he refused, Tywin could claim the king was perpetuating Aerys' injustices. If he agreed, Tywin gained a powerful advantage. I will give it my utmost consideration, Rhaegar repeated, meeting Tywin's gaze. That is all I can promise tonight. Tywin dipped his head once more. I am content with that for now, Your Grace. With that exchange, the feast continued. But Rhaegar's thoughts were not on the music or the food. Even as he rose with the queen to toast their guests, he weighed the ramifications of Tywin's request. Could he truly allow Jaime Lannister to abandon the White Cloak without undermining the Kingsguard's sanctity? Ser Barristan Selmy too would surely protest. On the other hand, an outright refusal might push Tywin further into opposition, possibly leading to open conflict. The king recalled the earlier talk of a middle course. This was no easy middle. That night, after the hall emptied and the braziers were extinguished, Rhaegar summoned Barristan to his private solar. By candlelight, he explained Tywin's request. Barristan's dismay was evident. A Kingsguard vow is for life, the knight said, brow furrowing. If we set aside that vow because it was demanded by a mad king, who's to say other vows won't be undone on some other pretext? The Kingsguard's integrity must remain absolute, or men will see the White Cloak as nothing but a convenient stepping stone. Rhaegar nodded. I share your worry, but if I refuse Tywin outright, he may muster forces for war. The realm is not yet strong enough for another conflict. What if he paused, choosing words. What if we offered some compromise? Jaime remains in the Kingsguard but is granted leave to attend to Lannister affairs in the West? Or we name Jaime the Lord Commander, eventually giving House Lannister prestige? Barristan's lips thinned. Prestige might not satisfy Lord Tywin's hunger. He wants an heir. Cersei is his daughter, but the Westerlands prefer a male heir. Tyrion, well, you know the rumors. Tywin would never accept the dwarf as heir. Jaime is his golden son, the warrior he groomed for greatness. Rhaegar paced, the candlelight casting his shadow long against the wall. "We cannot break the vow," he said firmly, more to himself than to Barristan. "I will not tarnish the King Guard for the sake of Tywin's ambitions. Yet I must keep him from turning rebellious." Barristan considered. "Then perhaps we can give him something else. Another concession. A seat on the small council, maybe. Master of laws or master of coin. Tywin might accept that if it means he has direct influence over the realm's governance. He was hand for many years, after all, and he might relish a similar role without the official title." Rhaegar braced a hand against the edge of the table. "He would effectively become my highest counselor, overshadowing Chelsted. That may cause friction within the council." "It might," Barristan agreed. "But it may be the price to avoid open war. If you grant him a position of influence but refuse to break Jaime's vow, you might keep him placated. He can spin it however he likes in the Westerlands. Meanwhile, the vow remains intact and the King's Guard remains inviolate." The king stared at the candle's flame, recalling how easily a spark could burn away illusions of peace. He nodded at last. "Send a message to Carlton Chelsted to prepare a new seat on the council. I will raise it with Tywin after the name day when the festivities are done." He exhaled. "I do not love this, Barristan." Barristan met his gaze. "Nor do I, your grace. But it is better than the alternative. War would tear us apart." With that settled, Rhaegar ended the discussion and dismissed Barristan to rest. Alone in the solar, he pondered how the realm's fate hinged on so many small concessions and bargains. Would giving Tywin a seat on the council lead to further demands, or would it keep the peace? He wondered if a time would come when he no longer needed to compromise, when his rule was secure enough to stand firm. But each day he felt the ghosts of the rebellion, the memory of the trident, and the knowledge that one false move could reignite a blaze that would devour them all. Prince Aegon's named day arrived with crisp winter air. Snow had not yet fallen in King's Landing, though flurries dusted the outskirts at dawn. The king and queen hosted a small ceremony in the throne room where lords and ladies brought gifts for the young prince. Aegon, just turning 3, clung shyly to his mother's skirts as the crowd looked on. Rhaenys, older by a few years, teased him gently. Some of the gifts were lavish. Tywin presented a small golden sword, purely decorative, encrusted with rubies. Mace Tyrell offered a miniature shield bearing the 3-headed dragon entwined with golden roses. Elia watched the display with a polite smile, though she found it rather ostentatious for a boy so young. Others gave simpler tokens, carved wooden horses, thick embroidered cloaks, small books of stories. Rhaegar made a point of thanking each lord and lady personally, mindful that these gestures were as much about politics as generosity. When it was Tywin's turn to approach the dais, he stepped forward, holding the elaborate chest that contained the golden sword. He bowed smoothly, then presented it with a flourish. "May Prince Aegon wield steel for the glory of House Targaryen and House Lannister alike," he intoned, as if forging a symbolic link. The hall applauded politely. Aegon shrank back from the gleaming gift, half fascinated, half frightened. Elia accepted it in his stead, while Rhaegar thanked Tywin in a clear, measured tone. He could sense Tywin's pride behind that mask of courtesy. The man was laying claim to the boy's favor in a public manner, perhaps reminding onlookers that the Lannisters were indispensable to the crown. Later, after the formalities, a smaller gathering was held in a side hall for the nobility to mingle more freely. Tables with spiced wine and hot cider lined the walls, while minstrels played festive tunes. Tywin mingled with Kevan Lannister and Cersei. Rhaegar approached them calmly. Before he could speak, Cersei inclined her head and said, "Your Grace, it is an honor to be here. My father often speaks of the days when he served his hand under your father. I trust you find King's Landing more agreeable now." Her voice was melodic, but there was a subtle edge to it. Rhaegar replied, "I do. Though we all labor to undo the damage of the war. We are grateful for House Lannister's contributions." Tywin studied the king. "Perhaps we might speak privately, Your Grace, at your earliest convenience." His meaning was clear. He wanted an answer about Jaime. Rhaegar nodded. "Tomorrow," Rhaegar said quietly. "I will receive you in my solar after the midday meal." Tywin seemed satisfied. He parted with a bow, leading Cersei away to greet others. Rhaegar lingered, scanning the throngs of nobles. Prince Lewin and Barristan hovered at the edges, watchful. Mace Tyrell was sampling the spiced wine, looking vexed by Tywin's presence. Near the dais, the Redwine twins from the Arbor conversed in hushed tones about their alliance with Robert Baratheon. One of them was betrothed to him, after all. All the realm's fractures were here in this hall: Lannister ambition, Tyrell vanity, Baratheon resentment, Martell pride. Rhaegar could almost see the invisible lines drawn among them. If he misstepped, those lines would ignite conflict again. That night, in the quiet of his chamber, Rhaegar steeled himself for the meeting with Tywin. When morning broke, he endured the usual routine of hearing smallfolk petitions and consulting with Carlton Chelstead on crown finances. By midday, he retired to his solar, dismissing all but Barristan, who stood by the door. Tywin arrived precisely on time, clad in a rich doublet of crimson velvet, his face impassive. After exchanging minimal pleasantries, the king gestured for him to sit. Barristan remained standing as a silent witness. Tywin began at once. "Your Grace, I trust you have considered my request regarding Jaime?" Rhaegar clasped his hands before him. "I have, and I must refuse. A Kingguard vow is sworn for life, regardless of who sat the throne when it was made. I cannot set aside that principle. To do so would undermine the very foundation of the White Cloaks." Tywin's features hardened a fraction, but he did not immediately protest. Rhaegar continued, "However, I do not wish any ill will between us. I value House Lannister's place in the realm. Therefore, I invite you, Lord Tywin, to take a seat on my small council as Master of Coin, if you will accept it." The subtle shift of Tywin's gaze betrayed his surprise. Then he recovered. "Master of Coin," he echoed. "It is a lesser office than Hand of the King. I served as Hand for nearly 2 decades. Rhaegar inclined his head. "I am aware. But the finances of the realm are of paramount importance, especially in these post-war days. No one can doubt House Lannister's mastery of gold. If you accept, you will have a great deal of influence over the crown's purse, ensuring we can rebuild and prosper. I cannot dismiss my current hand so abruptly, but I can offer you a voice at the heart of royal policy." Tywin was silent for a moment, weighing. The tension coiled in the air. Barristan shifted slightly, ready in case Tywin's reaction turned darker. But Tywin's voice remained cold and measured. "It is a gracious offer, Your Grace. I would be a fool to spurn it out of wounded pride. Yet Jaime remains a Kingsguard knight, and that is a bitter truth to my house. If I accept the seat, I do so in the hope that we can revisit the matter in the future." Rhaegar did not flinch. "You may hope as you wish, Lord Tywin, but know that my stance on Jaime's vow is not likely to change. He is a capable knight, and the Kingsguard needs such men." Tywin's eyes flickered, but he dipped his head in acknowledgement. "Then we have an understanding. I will serve as Master of Coin, and in return, House Lannister's resources stand ready to assist the realm. I trust this arrangement will benefit us both." Rhaegar nodded. "I believe it shall." He paused, letting some warmth into his tone. "Lord Tywin, I do not doubt your capability. The realm needs experienced men to guide it. My father's reign ended in chaos, and I mean to ensure that never happens again." Tywin rose, smoothing his doublet. "Wise words, Your Grace. I shall begin my duties immediately if you desire. The crown's finances require thorough examination." Rhaegar stood as well, offering his hand. "Then let it be done. I welcome you to the small council, Lord Tywin." For a heartbeat, Tywin considered the proffered hand, then clasped it briefly. Barristan observed with quiet relief that the meeting had ended without overt hostility. Tywin offered a final bow and departed, leaving behind the faint scent of gold-threaded ambition in the air. Over the following weeks, Tywin made himself indispensable. His skill in reorganizing tax collection and negotiating with the Iron Bank was unparalleled. The crown's coffers began to stabilize, coin trickled in from new levies on trade that Tywin cunningly revised to spare the poorest merchants while maximizing revenue from associate imports. Lords in the small council grumbled that Tywin was overshadowing Carlton Chelstead, but Rhaegar recognized that the realm truly benefited from Tywin's acumen. Slowly, he allowed himself to hope that by giving the lion a measure of power, he might avert the lion's claws. Some at court murmured that Tywin was pulling the king's strings as he had once done with Aerys in the early years. Yet Rhaegar did not permit Tywin to run roughshod. He insisted that final decisions rest with the council as a whole, and he kept Prince Lewin, Barristan, and even Varys in the loop to ensure Tywin did not overreach. It was a delicate balance, but for a time it seemed to work. Tywin's men remained camped outside the city, though in smaller numbers, and there was no immediate sign of aggression. As winter deepened, the realm carried on with an uneasy peace. Snow began to dust the roads north of the Crownlands, and travelers sometimes had to wait out storms in roadside inns. The king's men patrolled diligently, discouraging outlaws. Robert Baratheon's wedding to the Redwine girl loomed, promising yet another shift in the alliances of the Stormlands and the Reach. Rhaegar wondered if Robert's marriage would placate him or merely sharpen his resentments. Meanwhile, A raven arrived from Winterfell with word that Ned Stark's family grew. Catelyn had given birth to a healthy son, Robb Stark. The realm cheered the news, seeing it as a bright sign for the North. Hidden beneath those tidings, of course, was another child in Ned's care, one the realm knew nothing about. If Rhaegar closed his eyes, he could picture that boy, half Stark, half Targaryen, growing up with no knowledge of his father. Perhaps he would be happier that way. One cold dawn, as the king paced his solar, reading letters by candlelight, he felt a sudden wave of fatigue wash over him. The tension of months weighed on his shoulders. He set the letters aside and reached for his harp, plucking a soft, mournful melody. The sound filled the dim room, reminding him of who he had once been. A prince who believed in songs and secrets, who thought prophecy would guide him to a glorious destiny. Now he was a king, and prophecy felt more like a chain binding him to choices he could barely comprehend. He thought of Lyanna, of the child in the north, and of Elia and the children he had by her. The realm's peace balanced precariously on so many hidden truths. He kept playing, the notes trembling in the air. Gradually, the tension in his chest loosened, replaced by a fierce resolve. He could not collapse under the burdens of the crown. Too much depended on his steadiness, his willingness to meet lords like Tywin on the battlefield of cunning rather than steel. He finished the song with a final chord, a faint echo trembling into silence. Outside, the city stirred with dawn's light. Vendors would be opening their stalls, gold cloaks patrolling the streets, the wheel of daily life spinning onward. Soon, he would dress in royal garb, face the small council, and continue the delicate dance of rulership. He took a deep breath, recalling how close the realm had come to a different fate on the Trident. If he had fallen and Robert had stood victorious, the Red Keep might be painted with Targaryen blood. Instead, it was the Baratheons and Starks who were forced to accept Targaryen rule, albeit a gentler one than his father's. Yet peace was not the same as harmony. The realm was a tapestry of grudges and alliances, each thread prone to snapping. He set the harp aside gently and prepared himself for the day. Elia would be waiting, graceful in her own quiet sorrow, and Tywin would be at the council brandishing figures and ledgers. The lords and knights of Westeros would watch to see if King Rhaegar could keep the realm from tearing itself apart, or if the next spark would set everything aflame again. He whispered a silent vow to the Seven that he would do all in his power to protect the kingdom from madness and war. He had dreamed once of a grand destiny, but now he knew destiny was shaped by daily choices, not by prophecy alone. Thus the realm continued under King Rhaegar Targaryen's rule, perched between hope and fear. The days marched on, the nights grew longer, and in the far corners of Westeros, men whispered that a new age might be dawning. Some said it was the dawn of peace, a final healing of the war's scars. Others, more cynical, said it was just a prelude, that storms gather even when the sky appears calm. In the snows of the north, a boy of secret parentage grew under the Stark roof, unknowingly bound to a father on the Iron Throne. In the south, Tywin Lannister wielded the realm's purse, Robert Baratheon approached a wedding, and the Tyrells and Martells weighed their interests. And in King's Landing, a lonely king strove to hold it all together, haunted by songs of ice and fire and by the simple knowledge that the peace he had won at the Trident could vanish with the clang of steel. Yet each morning he rose again, placing the crown upon his head, walking into the throne room where the Iron Throne loomed like a dragon skeleton. He remembered what it cost to seat himself there, the blood on the Trident, the tears of thousands, the rending of families and hearts. He would not let that sacrifice be in vain. He would rule justly, forging alliances with honey rather than fire, while never forgetting that the shadow of his father's madness still lingered in the Red Keep. With measured steps he ascended the dais each day, and with careful words he governed. The realm held its breath, hoping that the Targaryen with a poet's soul could save them from repeating history's cruelties. Only time would tell if the realm's faith was misplaced, or if, at last, Westeros might know the gentle rule of a dragon who had learned the cost of war. The memory of the Trident lay behind them, a cautionary note in the symphony of power echoing through every hall and battlefield. Beneath the drifting snow and the turning leaves, hearts still smoldered with passion and vengeance. But for now at least, the Seven Kingdoms moved forward under the banner of a king who believed in a better future, carrying the scars of the past and the faint glimmer of a new dawn. And so the story continued, weaving threads of hope and dread, forging a reign that might be remembered by bards as the greatest of Targaryen triumphs or the final chapter before the darkness fell.